Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little saltier than usual, literally. You're about to step aboard a creaky, wind-blasted pirate vessel sometime in the brutal winters of the medieval seas. The kind of cold that stings your fingertips through threadbare gloves. The kind of hunger that gnaws a little louder every day. This isn't some Hollywood swashbuckling fantasy with the parrots and a roasted leg of mutton on every deck. No. Tonight we're getting into what medieval pirates actually ate when the world turned icy and cruel and the rum started running low. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really helps me keep bringing you these strange, sleepy trips into the past. Quick check-in. What city are you in and what time is it there? Just curious who's out there, watching this while drifting off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It hits your nose first, salt, brine, and something deeper. A greasy tang that clings to the sails, the wood, your skin. You step cautiously onto the main deck of a 14th century pirate cog, not one of those romantic galleons with 30 cannons and polished brass. This thing's more like a soggy shoebox with a mast. You're somewhere in the North Atlantic, and winter's teeth are already sinking in. The air is knife-sharp, every breath scraping your throat. The sea churns dark and thick like an angry soup. You're cold, you're hungry. You're surrounded by men who haven't bathed in a month and who look like they'd eat your boots if you left them unattended, and they just might. Tonight's meal, if you can call it that, is a small tin bowl of salted cod, boiled in seawater until it's more flake than fish. It smells passable, but only if you have a head cold. You sit cross-legged on the deck beside a squat barrel doubling as a table. The cod is stringy and the salt dries your lips out before you even finish chewing. But it's food. Technically, this is survival cuisine. It's less about pleasure and more about not dying. Salted cod was a staple for medieval pirates and sailors alike, not because it tasted good, but because it lasted. If dried properly and stored away from moisture, salted fish could survive entire winters without rotting. In fact, the fish on your plate right now might have been caught and preserved over 6 months ago. That's the good news. The bad news. You have to eat this for the next 3 weeks. Salt, more salt, and a sprinkle of despair. Your shipmates don't complain. They just eat hunched over, the breath from their noses clouding in the frigid air. There's old Barlow missing 2 fingers and a lot of teeth, slurping his ration like it's the last feast of kings. You see a boy, no older than 12, sneak a second helping when no one's looking. You don't blame him. You almost do the same. But the cold has another trick up its sleeve, thirst. The salt dries you from the inside out, and the only fresh water on board is portioned so tightly it might as well be sacred. Some of the men mix snow with seawater and boil it, hoping the salt will be diluted enough. Spoiler, it's not. You cup your bowl and look out across the grey sea, your eyes stinging from the wind. A few gulls wheel overhead, probably wondering how long before someone falls overboard, or dies. That's pirate optimism right there. Let's talk logistics for a moment. Most medieval pirates didn't actually have a galley. A kitchen, that is. On board, fire and wood were too dangerous to mess with on a cramped, swaying wooden ship. Food had to be cooked on shore, or at the very least pre-cooked, and eaten cold. That cod you're eating, boiled hours ago in a battered iron pot on a tiny brazier dangerously close to catching the ship on fire. Again. Now here's a weird little fact. Salt wasn't just a preservative, it was currency. Entire coastal towns in Europe survived by producing sea salt for sailors, and pirates sometimes raided just for barrels of the stuff. Forget gold, get the salt, that's survival treasure. But here's where historians get into slap fights. Just how common was salted cod among pirates, really? Some argue that pirates mostly raided for food instead of storing it, hitting up merchant ships or coastal villages to resupply rather than hauling barrels of meat that could rot or spill. Others say that even pirates needed a backup stash, especially during the long northern winters when ports were frozen and towns were sparse. You lean back against a barrel, chewing slowly, trying not to notice how your toes have gone numb inside your soggy leather boots. The ship creaks, and someone below deck starts coughing violently. You can smell the mould in the planks. The air's so damp your clothes feel heavier than they should. And you've got exactly 2 more meals before you're out of cod and onto something worse. Still, there's a strange rhythm to it all. The salt, the cold, the sky darkening into navy and silver as the moon slips out. You're still alive, still chewing. You close your eyes and just let the boat rock you a little. And when someone jokes about turning the next dead rat into stew, you can't tell if they're serious. You're starting to think the sea has a personal vendetta against your teeth. This morning's breakfast? Hardtack. Again, it looks like bread if you squint and haven't eaten in 2 days. But once it hits your mouth, the illusion crumbles. Literally. Into shards. Dry, craggy little landmines that feel like you're chewing on roofing tiles. You grip it in both hands and gnaw slowly, like a determined squirrel trying to break into a vault. Your jaw aches before you even make it halfway through. No one's talking much. Everyone's chewing or attempting to. There's a kind of silent misery that sets in after days of the same thing. And this is the very definition of edible punishment. Hardtack was a sailor's staple, not because anyone liked it, but because it wouldn't go bad. This stuff could last years, not weeks, years. We're talking find some in a shipwreck and still technically eat it levels of shelf life. It was made from flour and water, no yeast, no fat, nothing but the bare minimum. Once baked, it was joined, till it was nearly indestructible. If you dropped one on the floor, it might crack the floorboards before it cracked itself. This batch, of course, is extra fossilized. You've been told to dunk it in water to soften it, or ale, if you're lucky. But this morning there's neither. So you chew and chew and chew. Your tongue starts feeling like it belongs to someone else. Old Barlow, sitting next to you again like some cursed mascot of malnutrition, gives you a knowing nod. Bit lively today, this one, he rasps, holding up his own biscuit. It's got a small hole in the centre, maybe a worm tunnelled through once, but who's judging? Barlow apparently names his hardtack. This one is Eliza. Don't ask. Now here's something unsettling. Sailors used to break their hardtack with the butt of a knife or the handle of a musket, not because it looked cool, but because trying to bite it outright could literally snap a tooth. And guess what? Dental care in the 14th century was, let's go with non-existent. If you lost a tooth to food, that was just the start of your problems. Infection? Rot. Or, trying to chew with half your molars gone, fun. You managed to down most of your biscuit, and decide not to finish the last chunk. Not worth it. You tuck it away for later because the thought of hunger still trumps jaw pain. Around you the crew gets moving again, sluggish but determined. Cold wind slices through their coats as ropes are hauled and sails adjusted. You notice a few of the men eyeing the biscuit you just tucked away. You move it deeper into your coat. Now here's something fascinating. While hardtack was the main filler, it was often paired with something called ship's butter, which was basically fat stored in barrels. You'd smear it on the biscuit to make it slide down easier. If you were lucky, it wasn't rancid. If you were really lucky, it still had some animal origin you could guess. But today there's no butter. Just the hard, dry crunch of despair. Again. Still you're surviving, just like the real pirates once did. But let's pause and look at the big picture. There's a surprising academic squabble over whether pirates kept large stores of rations or simply scavenged their way through winter. Some historians believe pirates preferred to live lean, always on the move, always raiding. A ship carrying food was a floating pantry, and better than risking spoilage. Others argue that in colder months, raiding was harder, so pirates had to prep like everyone else, pack food, ration it, and stretch every crumb. And then there's the question of where this stuff even came from. Hardtack wasn't made on ships. It was usually bought in bulk or looted. In some cases, pirates would steal sacks of flour and bake it themselves during port stays. Not very dramatic, but essential. Because if there's one thing worse than hardtack, it's no hardtack. Mid-morning rolls in and your belly groans again, already pretending it didn't just have a meal. That's how little hardtack satisfies. The wind's picking up now, and the cold is cutting deeper. One of the crew wraps a rag around his face to keep the frost off his cheeks. You consider doing the same, but realise all your rags are already being used as makeshift socks. The sea glitters, but there's no warmth to it. The sky has that low, colourless weight that promises more cold, more hunger, and probably a few angry seabirds. By midday, someone tries to lighten the mood by telling a story about a pirate who once carved his last hardtack into the shape of a skull before eating it, called it dining with death. Nobody laughs. Everyone's too busy remembering how hungry they are. Still, in this grim little community of frostbitten outlaws, there's a weird sort of camaraderie. You, Barlow, Eliza the Biscuit, and the rest of this floating chaos crew. You've survived another morning, another brittle, unflavoured test of endurance. You tell yourself it builds character, or at least stronger jaw muscles. As the sun dips lower and shadows stretch across the deck, someone starts preparing tonight's meal. You pray it isn't another biscuit. Spoiler, it totally is. By the time the sun begins to slide down the bruised horizon, you're already thinking about dinner with a sort of morbid dread. Your stomach is rumbling like a storm cloud, but your brain remembers lunch and breakfast, and every other meal this week has been some variation of salt, bone and chalk. So when the cook yells out something about jerky, you perk up, slightly hopeful, till you see it. It's not the lean, spice-rubbed strips you're imagining. This is medieval pirate jerky, a twisted, dried strip of meat with the texture of old rope and the aroma of something that might have once been a goat. Or a dog. Honestly, you're not sure. The origin of the meat is less important than the fact that it's technically still edible, or at least chewable. You take your ration and sniff it cautiously. It's dark, tough, and peppered with small white crystals. Salt, supposedly, though you can't help but imagine it could be something worse. With no fire lit and no spices available, this jerky is nothing more than dried survival. Still, it's a break from hardtack, and you need the protein. You gnaw at a corner. It's like trying to eat your own boot. Around you, the crew sits scattered across the deck, huddled in cloaks and threadbare blankets. One guy you've started calling Three Toes, for painfully obvious reasons, pulls a sliver of jerky from between his teeth and examines it with theatrical suspicion. You think this one's rat? He asks no one in particular. No one answers, no one wants to know. Now, let's get into some of the grittier truths. Rats. Yes, hill-scurrying, squeaking rats. They were everywhere on ships, nests in the hold, running across ropes, even peeking out from food barrels like they owned the place. And yes, when the food ran out, and it always did, pirates didn't always turn their noses up at rodent out meat. In fact, in brutal winters, rat meat might have been a treasured source of protein. Cooked, ideally, skinned maybe, and shared with quiet, shamefaced desperation. You glance around the deck and spot one of the younger deckhands crouched near the barrel pile, poking with a stick. Either he's chasing a rat or planning dinner. So why didn't pirates just stock more food? Well, let's consider the ship. Space was precious. You had to prioritise weapons, sails, drinking water, loot and crew quarters. Food came last. Preservation was tough. Jerky helped. It could last weeks, even months, if kept dry. But the moment the storage area got damp, the meat would spoil or mould, and then you were out of luck and back to begging the cook for another chunk of dried despair. One quirky thing you learn while gnawing your way through your jerky is that pirates often believed certain meats carried luck. Some swore that rat meat, when eaten during a storm, would keep you from drowning. Others claimed dried rabbit, if salted under a full moon, could keep your ship from getting boarded. You'd laugh, except you're pretty sure Three Toes is muttering some kind of meat prayer under his breath right now. As the wind howls louder and the sea starts rocking the ship more violently, dinner gets interrupted. Someone spotted sails in the distance. Everyone scrambles, eyes squinting through the spray. Could be a merchant ship, could be navy, could be something to plunder or someone trying to plunder you. In the scramble, your jerky gets knocked out of your hands and lands in a puddle of freezing seawater. You briefly consider retrieving it. You do retrieve it. You wring it out like a dishcloth and keep eating. Because dignity left this ship 3 ports ago. The sails in the distance turn out to be fishing vessels, nothing worth chasing. The crew slowly settles again, buzzing with that weird mix of adrenaline and exhaustion. Someone opens a barrel of rum and starts passing it around, just enough to numb the cold in your bones and put the meat flavour out of your mind. The rum is harsh and burns going down, but you don't care. At this point it's practically medicine. A quiet falls over the deck. Stars blink out from behind the storm clouds, and the ship creaks with the rhythm of something ancient and patient. You lie back against a coil of rope, stomach vaguely full but still unsatisfied. The jerky wasn't delicious, but it was calories, and calories are gold out here, so here's a fun scholarly debate to chew on along with your rehydrated meat strip. Just how reliant were pirates on meat like this during winter months? Some historians argue that pirates had secret trade networks with coastal farmers or even corrupt officials, getting fresh meat even in harsh conditions. Others say that during the colder seasons, any supply chain broke down, and pirates had to scavenge, hunt, or resort to unpleasant alternatives, like salted leather or stewed boots. You shiver. watching your breath rise in small clouds. You kind of hope the ones who believe in boot soup are wrong, but given how chewy some of these jerky strips are, you're not totally convinced they didn't already try it. Later that night, someone starts singing, a low broken sea chanty about a captain who sold his soul for a sack of salted pork. It sounds half drunk and half haunted. The lyrics talk about hunger, frostbite, and love lost to the sea. You listen in silence, tapping your foot softly, chewing on the last string of jerky, which tastes like regret and rope. Another night, another strange meal, and winter's nowhere near over. The next morning hits like a cold slap. You wake up with your back pressed against damp wood, a thin layer of frost creeping up the edge of your blanket, and a few of your fingers curled in on themselves like they've forgotten how to exist. The North Atlantic isn't just cold, it's a breathing thing that sucks the warmth out of you with every gust. The wind whistles through the rigging, and you're reasonably sure it's mocking you. Breakfast, there's a thick mysterious pot already bubbling on the brazier at the stern. You drag yourself over, boots squelching from last night's ice melt, and try not to gag as the cell hits you. "Sea pie," says the cook, like he's announcing a royal banquet. He ladles a chunky greyish stew into your wooden bowl, and you stare down at it with quiet horror. There are floating bits of something that looks like bird or fish or both. You can see a feather, which does not inspire confidence. The broth is thickened with hardtack crumbs and what might be turnip or onion, or a soft shapeless vegetable from the grey family. You raise a spoonful to your mouth, hesitate, and finally just go for it. It's not bad. It's not good either, but it's warm, and it's not another strip of jerky or a brick of biscuit. And that's the new bar for joy. Sea pie was one of those flexible dishes pirate cooks leaned on when ingredients were running thin but morale needed a boost. Not an actual pie in the modern sense. It was more like a stew, thick and goopy, thrown together from whatever the cook could find. Salt pork, dried fish, old beans, root vegetables, sometimes hardtack softened into sludge. Some even threw in dried fruit or beer to stretch the flavour. If you were on a lucky ship, it was a glorious steaming mess. If you weren't, it tasted like boiled shoe. You slurp again, trying not to think too hard about the meat. The feather is definitely from a gull. Maybe it fell in. Maybe it was the main protein. Someone next to you is chewing on something stringy. "Tastes like cat," he says. You give him a look. He shrugs. "Not that I'd know." One of the most fascinating things about pirate life was this constant improvisation. They were sea scavengers, not just for treasure but for food. And by the time winter rolled in and ports were closed or too risky to raid, meals turned into creative experiments in not dying. If a ship had hunted a seal a few days ago, the meat might be chopped up and thrown in. If someone trapped a seabird, that too. If someone found a seabird already dead, don't ask questions, just salt it, boil it, and add it to the pie. There's even a recorded case of pirates making a pie from dried eel and fruit. Supposedly it was sweet-sour and enough to keep scurvy away, though you had to chew for about 45 minutes per bite. Now here's your quirky fact for the day. Some pirate crews developed a ranking system for meals. A 3-slap stew meant it was so bad the cook got slapped 3 times. A 0-slap pie meant he might live another week without being tossed overboard. Today's sea pie, probably a 1-slap minimum, maybe 1.5. After the meal you feel something unfamiliar. Warmth. Not from the food exactly, but from the small collective sigh that passes over the crew. No one's dying of hunger today, not yet. Then the cold wind reminds you who's boss. You pull your coat tighter and climb the ladder to the lookout perch. From up here, the world is nothing but grey water and grey sky, blending like an infinite bruise. You squint at the horizon. Nothing. Below, the crew is already starting chores. Patching sails, checking barrels, and cleaning out the bilge with long-handled scrapers. You can hear laughter somewhere down near the hold. It's thin and dry, but it's there. You think about what went into that sea pie. Probably some of the last preserved meat on board. Maybe the last turnip. This is a turning point. Soon meals won't be about combining ingredients. They'll be about finding them. Here's where scholars start to scratch their heads. Just how often did pirates actually fish? The romantic idea is that they just tossed a line over the side and reeled in dinner. But in winter seas, good luck. Fish went deeper. Ice sometimes froze the surface near the coast, and the gear needed to fish successfully wasn't always available or practical on a fast-moving pirate vessel. Some crews fished, yes, but it was more for port days or emergencies than daily meals. And you're definitely heading toward emergency territory. Still, you can't help wondering what kind of bird that was. Gull, puffin, some sort of unfortunate sea crow? You try not to dwell on it. By afternoon, as wind dies down and a faint snowfall starts drifting over the ship. You watch it from the deck, flakes catching on your sleeves, on the rigging, on the wide brim of the first mate's ridiculous hat. For a moment, it's peaceful, quiet, like the sea's holding its breath. Then the cook yells down from the galley corner, "Next meal's stew! If we catch that rat again." Everyone groans. Even the rat, presumably. By the end of the week, your nose doesn't really work anymore. Not because it's clogged, though it is, but because it's decided to stage a full shutdown rather than process any more of the smells or dwarbles coming off the cook's brazier. Every time you pass that spot on the deck, it's a new mystery cloud of funk. This morning, it's sharp, earthy, and vaguely fermented, like someone left a shark in a hot wine barrel, and this time you actually hope it's not meat. Spoiler, it is. Welcome to one of the more questionable culinary turns of your medieval pirate experience, fermented fish. Or more accurately, a kind of fermented marine something, since labelling wasn't exactly a thing in pirate kitchens. This dish, if you can even call it that, is a desperate man's answer to two awful questions. How do we store protein through a freezing winter, and how much are we willing to tolerate to not starve? You cradle your bowl warily as the stew is ladled out. It's pale, slick, with chunks of off-white meat bobbing in a cloudy broth that smells like vinegar, mated with low tide. You look at Barlow, he's already eating. Of course he is. The man probably has a stomach made of cannon iron and a regret. You force a spoonful into your mouth and instantly regret every choice that led you to this moment. The meat squishes between your teeth, softened in a way meat shouldn't be. The flavour hits you like a punch. Sour, salty and strangely sweet at the end, like it's trying to apologise for being born. Your jaw pauses halfway through the chew, unsure whether to commit or just give up entirely. Fermentation, you remind yourself, is not rot, it's survival. See, in the frozen north, where pirates sometimes ventured during the longer winters, especially in the North Sea or around Icelandic routes, fresh meat was rare, but freezing temperatures made fermentation possible. Some crews learned the technique from coastal Nordic villagers, burying fish or meat in snow, salt, or even in the ground and letting it naturally ferment. Think of it as an ancient pirate fridge crossed with a biological science experiment that no one asked for. In Iceland, they still eat a version of this today, hakal or fermented shark. And no, this isn't some spicy sushi roll. It's meat that's been buried, drained of toxic ammonia over months, and then aired out until it reaches that perfect combination of chewiness and public health concern. According to some accounts, the smell alone can clear a room. And guess what? Pirates didn't have fridges or taste testers or any shame left, so they went for it. You're probably not eating shark right now. More likely some bottom feeder or fatty fish caught weeks ago, salted to high heaven, and left to ferment in a barrel lashed to the coldest part of the ship. But the effect is the same. You gag a little, but you keep eating, because if you don't, someone else will. Around you, the mood is quiet. No one's loving this meal, but no one's fighting it either. The worst part? It's not the grossest thing you've eaten lately. Let's talk about famine, real famine. Pirates weren't immune to it. In brutal winters, when trade routes slowed or ports iced over, when prey stopped sailing and the sea offered nothing but storms, ships turned inward. Rations dropped. Discipline sometimes did too. Some pirates resorted to cutting rations by force, keeping the captain and his close men well fed while the rest of the crew gnawed on bones and old biscuit dust. Others shared everything evenly, which sometimes just meant everyone starved equally. And then there were the rumours. You've heard whispers from some of the older crew, stories about ships that ran out of food for weeks, stuck in sea ice, surrounded by water but dying of thirst and hunger. Stories about men who disappeared below deck and were never seen again. Fell overboard, the captain might say. But no one believes that when there's no splash, and the cook is suddenly boiling stew with the door locked. You glance down at your bowl, there's meat in it. That's all you know. That leads us right into tonight's scholarly debate. How much did pirates rely on fermented foods, and how widespread were these methods? Some historians argued that though fermentation was rare among pirate crews, seen as risky and culturally unfamiliar, especially to English or French pirates. Others believe it was a passed-down survival skill, adopted from coastal tribes or Nordic traders, and more common than we think, especially among mixed crews with diverse backgrounds. One theory suggests that the more international the crew, the more experimental the pantry. It's a lovely thought. You and your fellow outlaws bonding over horrific, rotting fish. Back on deck, someone actually says they like the stew. "Got a kick to it," he says, grinning with blackened teeth. You silently vow to never take his culinary opinion seriously again. As the pot is scraped clean, the wind picks up. Cold, sharp, wet, cuts right through your coat and down into your bones. You wrap your blanket tighter and head below, stomach swirling from the sour stew, nose barely functioning, and the taste still clinging to the roof of your mouth. Your hammock creaks as you climb in. You stare up at the hull beams, watching your breath puff in the air above you. Someone farts, loudly, then coughs, then groans. Could be the stew, could be life. The ship creaks in response, gently bobbing in the blackness. Outside, snow begins to fall again, tapping lightly on the wood above your head. You close your eyes and think of anything other than fermented fish. By now you've developed a deep, uneasy relationship with barrels. Not just because you're constantly tripping over them on the deck or leaning against them while trying to soak up a fraction of warmth from the dying sun, but because nearly everything you eat, or are forced to eat, comes out of one. And today, that uneasy relationship turns into full-blown betrayal. The morning starts with a shout, not the usual land-ho or sail-spotted kind of shout, but the urgent kind that usually precedes disaster. You hurry toward the noise and find a cluster of crew huddled around an open barrel. The smell hits before you even get close, sour, rotten, unmistakably meat gone wrong. One of the lads tips the barrel forward slightly, and out tumbles a glistening hunk of something that might have once been beef. The surface is slimy, tinged green around the edges, and, worse, moving. Tiny, wriggling white worms squirm across the surface like they've paid rent. There's a moment of silence, then a collective groan. Someone gags, someone else curses. Old Barlow, for once, doesn't even try to joke. That's how you know it's serious. Turns out this was one of the last barrels of preserved beef on board. Salted, stored mal, and sealed tightly. Or at least it was sealed tightly. Some moisture got in. Maybe a split in the wood, maybe poor sealing back at the port. Whatever the cause, the result is a complete loss. Wormy meat stew is not on the menu today, or ever. Not voluntarily. You stand there staring at the slick surface of the meat, wondering if the cook will try to save it. He eyes the barrel, mutters something about boiling it good, then seems to reconsider. Even for a pirate, this is pushing the line. Food storage at sea was always a gamble, especially in winter. Salt was the best preservative they had, and it did an impressive job for a while, but salted meat was only as good as the barrel it was stored in. Too wet, too warm, or too long, and you'd open the lid to find your dinner had become a science experiment. That's the risk pirates took, store enough to survive. But not so much that half of it rots before you can eat it. You sit on a barrel, not the cursed one, and try not to think about how much food you've just lost. Everyone's already doing the math. One barrel down means 2 days without meat. Maybe more, depending on how the rest of the stock looks. And the weather's turning again. Grey skies. That wet, heavy cold that creeps into your joints. You've got another storm on the horizon, and nothing decent left to eat. One of the crew starts poking through the bad beef with a stick, flipping over a chunk like he's considering it. "No," the cook growls from behind him. "Even I have standards." So, what do you do with spoiled meat at sea? That's the tricky part. You can't just chuck it overboard without attracting every shark in the ocean. Or worse, giving away your position to other ships. The smell alone could linger for miles. Instead, they wrap it up in sailcloth and stash it until they can dump it further from the ship or burn it. Neither option is great, especially when you're trying to conserve fuel and keep a low profile. Here's a fringe little historical tidbit for you. Some crews, when desperate enough, tried cutting away the rotted outer layers of meat and boiling the inside. They believed the heat would kill whatever bad spirits or bacteria they were dealing with. And sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. But if you were starving in the North Sea with frostbite chewing at your toes, a little worm didn't seem like such a big deal. This all leads to a bigger debate that gets historians all fired up. Did pirates have designated quartermasters or cooks who monitored food quality regularly? Or was it more of a meh, it's probably fine situation? Some argue pirate crews were more democratic than we think, with voted leaders and assigned roles, including food oversight. Others claim that the chaos of pirate life left little room for systems, and food was checked only when it started to crawl. Looking at your current situation, you're starting to lean toward option 2. Later that day, the cook calls for a full barrel check. Every container is cracked open and examined. The crew groans and moans, but deep down, everyone knows it's necessary. A few barrels of dried beans, still good. One of pickled onions, somehow better than expected. A second meat barrel, sketchy but salvageable. The third, gone. More worms, more rot. You watch the food supply shrink before your eyes. That night, dinner is broth, just broth, a few beans, some water, a dash of what might be pepper or might be mildew scraped off the inside of a lid. It's thin, tasteless and warm. That's the best you can say for it. You eat slowly, staring into the liquid like it might tell your future. The crew is silent. No songs, no banter, just spoons scraping bowls and the occasional sniffle. The wind howls louder as darkness settles, the kind of wind that brings ice with it. You wrap yourself in your coat and think about that beef, about the worms, about how your standards are slipping every day. Would you eat it if things got worse, would they? You don't want to answer that yet. The first sip burns. Not the warm and cosy, sit by the fire kind of burn, but the raw, throat-stripping, was that cleaning fluid? Kind of burn that lets you know you're still alive. Barely. You grimace. But the second sip is easier. The third, almost pleasant. That's the trick with pirate booze. It doesn't taste good, but it feels like salvation. It's rum, of course, not the sweet spiced kind you'd pour over holiday cake. This is rough-cut, barrel-aged, bootlegged firewater that would melt the paint off a modern ship's hull. Still, tonight it's being passed around like Holy Communion. You cradle your cup like it's the last warm thing left in the world. Because it kind of is. After the disaster with the worm meat, the crew's morale dipped into dangerous territory. The air on deck turned tense. Too many quiet stares. Too many hands resting on blades just a little too casually. The captain, sharp-eyed and always a step ahead of mutiny, ordered the rum barrels cracked. A man with a drink in his gut is less likely to gut his shipmate, he said deadpan, and no one argued. So here you are, huddled beneath the moonlight, wrapped in threadbare wool and a flickering buzz of warmth from the inside out. Your cup is half full and steaming slightly in the cold, and your face feels numb in a way that's oddly comforting. Around you the crew laughs louder than usual, even if their eyes are still hollow. The booze helps, it always does. Now don't get it twisted, pirates didn't drink like this for fun alone. Alcohol was necessary. Safe drinking water was nearly impossible to maintain on long voyages. Stored water spoiled fast, growing algae or turning rancid in the sun. Barrels were prone to leaks, rot or contamination, especially during temperature swings. Rum, beer and wine didn't spoil as easily, and the alcohol kept the bad stuff at bay. So pirates drank. A lot. It wasn't always rum either. Depending on what region the pirates haunted, it could be cheap wine, fermented grain beer, or even distilled spirits made from fruit or cane sugar. Caribbean pirates had the best access to rum thanks to the sugar plantations and molasses trade. But even northern pirates, including the rougher medieval crews, would barter for whatever booze they could find, sometimes travelling inland just to steal a few barrels from a winter tavern or monastery. Tonight's rum is harsh and high proof, likely watered down from the captain's private stash, but it's doing the job. You can feel your toes again, your stomach has stopped growling for at least an hour, and someone has started singing. It's a slurred, off-key tune about a maiden in Dover who mistook a squid for her fiancé. No one knows the words past the third verse, but that doesn't stop them from shouting rhyming nonsense. You smile into your cup, letting the bitter sting coat your throat again. Fun fact, pirates often mixed their alcohol with other things, spices, when there they had them. Fruit, if it wasn't rotting. One infamous drink was bumbo, a Caribbean cocktail of rum, sugar, water and nutmeg. If a ship had the ingredients, it was served on special days. If they didn't, the cook might make a faux bumbo, which was just watered down rum with a crushed worm biscuit for texture. No, seriously, some ships was even brewed their own. You've heard rumours of crews fermenting pine sap or rotting apples into something technically drinkable. The stuff might blind you, but at least you'd be too drunk to notice your hunger. You sip again, slower now. The warmth lingers longer. You're starting to feel human again, or some foggy approximation of one. Around you the laughter gets louder. Someone's dancing a little jig on the deck despite the ice. A few men are playing dice with bones and cursing like sailors, which makes sense because they are sailors. But under all that noise is something quieter. Desperation. That's the thing no one wants to admit. The rum keeps the hunger at bay, dulls the edge of the cold, gives the illusion of plenty. But tomorrow you're still out of meat. You're still chewing bean soup and wondering when the next storm will sweep in. You're still trapped in a wooden box, floating through nowhere, praying your stomach doesn't turn on you in the night. And sometimes the booze doesn't help. Sometimes it makes things worse. A sailor named Dane, young, probably no more than 20, gets too far into his cup and starts shouting at shadows, claims he saw a ghost near the mainmast, a dead crewmate from a storm weeks ago. No one knows what to say. He's not the first to see things. After a few cold nights and too much rum, some just break. Another man punches a barrel and splits his knuckles open, then laughs like it didn't hurt. He doesn't stop bleeding for a long time. So here's your scholarly debate of the night. Did pirates drink themselves stupid as a lifestyle, or was alcohol more regulated than we think? Some records suggest that captains rationed the booze, distributing it in careful doses to keep the crew steady. Others argue that it flowed freely, especially in winter months when movement was limited and mutiny loomed. There are even logs from captured pirate ships showing precisely measured rum allocations, down to the ounce, proof that not every pirate wanted his crew stumbling drunk during battle or bad weather. Then again, the same logs sometimes mention entire barrels going missing overnight. So, grain of salt? Eventually the cups run dry, the laughter fades, the cold creeps back in. You lie in your hammock, head spinning just enough to forget the spoiled meat and the worm biscuit stew. The wood creaks, the sails whisper above, and your heartbeat slows into a soft, warm rhythm. Tomorrow the rum's gone, the food's not better, but tonight you're drunk enough to pretend none of that matters. And that's good enough. You wake up to the sound of someone screaming. Not a battle cry, not a "we've spotted land" sort of cheer. This one is panicked, wet and raw, echoing off the wooden walls like it's trying to escape the ship entirely. You bolt upright in your hammock, the hangover still wearing steel-toed boots inside your skull. Your mouth is dry, your head is pounding, and your tongue feels like someone stored it in a barrel of salt overnight, which is honestly kind of fitting. The commotion is coming from the lower hold. You climb down into the gloom, every creak of the ladder sending sharp twinges through your temples. You push past a crowd, gathered in a tight circle. At the centre is a sailor named Coric, face pale and eyes wide. His mouth is streaked with blood, and then he opens it again. His teeth, what's left of them anyway. 3 are missing entirely. The rest are black at the base, some barely hanging on by threads. His gums are puffy, purple and bleeding, like someone's wrung them out. He looks like he's aged 20 years overnight. Scurvy, the ship surgeon mutters, almost casually, as if he's just confirming the weather. Another one. Scurvy, the invisible executioner of the sea. You've heard the word tossed around before, but now you're seeing what it does. It doesn't kill quick, it kills slow. First your gums, then your joints, your skin bruises from the lightest touch. Old scars reopen, your bones ache, your breath starts to smell like decay. Eventually, your organs just give up. You glance around the hold. Several of the crew are suddenly very interested in their own mouths, poking at teeth with nervous fingers. One of the men whispers a prayer under his breath. Another quietly pulls out a small pouch of dried citrus peel, like it's the most precious thing in the world, because it kind of is. Scurvy is caused by a deficiency of vitamin C, something fresh fruits and vegetables provide in abundance, but which are laughably scarce on a medieval pirate ship in the middle of winter. Especially now, when ports are unreachable, supplies are spoiled, and your last vegetable was a turnip chunk in week-old broth. Once upon a time, back on land, you might have laughed at the idea that something as simple as a lemon could save a life. Now, you'd trade a gold doubloon for a single wedge. You return topside, heart heavier than before. The cold wind doesn't help. It cuts into your cheeks like it's mad at your existence. You find a quiet corner near the bow, lean against the railing, and let your breath fog up in front of you. And that's when you hear it. Lemon juice, someone whispers nearby. Two sailors talking in hushed tones, as if just saying it aloud might summon some citrus miracle from the sea. I heard the French ships keep bottles of it. For medicine. Captain's orders. The other man snorts. Sure. And I heard the Spanish rub it on their wounds and never die. You believe everything you hear? But that's the thing, no one really knows what works. Not for sure. That's part of the problem. Some think vinegar helps, others swear by garlic or onions. There's even a wild theory floating around that seawater, taken in small sips, somehow prevents scurvy. Spoiler, it doesn't. It just makes you go mad faster. Some ships tried growing herbs in little barrel gardens or hoarding barrels of sauerkraut or pickled greens. The results were mixed, and most pirates, they didn't have the luxury. Citrus fruits spoiled fast if you could even get them. Some pirate crews struck deals with coastal farmers or island traders to stock up when they could. Others looted merchant ships and prized any crate of oranges or limes above gold. Because gold couldn't keep your teeth in your mouth. And here's your quirky little historical detail. Some pirate captains, believe it or not, made scurvy prevention part of their code. In a few scattered records, you'll find rules stating that every man aboard was entitled to a weekly portion of dried fruit when available, of course. A tiny clause buried between share the loot and don't stab your crewmates without cause. Pirates. Violent, unpredictable, but surprisingly dental forward. But here's the scholarly debate that still lingers. Did pirates really understand what caused scurvy, or were they just grasping at rumours and hope? Some historians argue that even into the 17th century, many believed scurvy was caused by bad air, or rotting moisture in the bones. Others suggest that sailors had anecdotal knowledge that they knew citrus worked, even if they didn't understand why. Some pirate journals mention the miraculous effects of eating oranges, but never connect the dots fully. They just called it luck. Back below deck, Corric's been moved to a corner and wrapped in blankets. He's not moaning anymore. That might be good or very bad. The surgeon does what he can, rubs vinegar on the gums, whispers something about onion water, and shrugs helplessly. You look at Corric's face. It's the face of someone who knows the worst is coming and knows there's nothing to be done about it. That night the crew is quieter than usual. The rum's gone, the meat is gone, and now the teeth are starting to go too. You sit with your back against a barrel, holding a carved wooden spoon like it might suddenly produce a lemon if you believe hard enough. You try to remember what an orange even tastes like. The sweetness, the acid, the clean juicy burst. Right now, even the memory seems too rich, like something only kings get. The wind howls above you, colder than ever. Your joints ache. Your gums feel okay, for now. You make a mental note to check them in the morning, just in case. Land. Sweet, muddy, frozen land. You spot it just after dawn, when the sky is still the colour of rusted iron and the sea rolls slow and sluggish like it's recovering from a hangover. A jagged little scrap of coastline, snow-covered, treeless, and about as inviting as a cemetery, but it might as well be paradise. The crew lets out a low, collective groan of relief. No cheering, no celebrations, just the exhausted gratitude of people who are cold, half-starved, and desperate for anything that doesn't float. The captain confirms the spot. An old wintering cove known from past voyages, nestled on the edge of a forgotten northern fishing town. Not large enough to have any real defences, but big enough to have supplies. Maybe. If the locals haven't frozen solid or eaten each other already, you're only half joking. The ship limps into the bay, sails slack. The hull caked with salt and frost, and ice clings to the ropes. Your hands are stiff from gripping the rail, but the sight of land triggers a spark in your gut. Hope, or maybe just the distant memory of warmth. Either way, gets you moving. Ashore, the town greets you with all the charm of a haunted painting. Wooden shacks crouch low under snowdrifts. Smoke curls from a few stone chimneys, which is promising. There are no guards, no harbour defences, just a handful of weary villagers peeking out from behind animal hide curtains, trying to decide whether a pirate ship in winter is a curse or a business opportunity. You disembark with the others, boots crunching over frostbitten mud, hands tucked deep into sleeves. The wind bites harder here. Funny how land can sometimes feel colder than sea, probably because now you're standing still long enough to notice. You make your way into the village square, or what passes for one, led by the quartermaster and a few muscle-heavy lads with more knives than facial expressions. There's no plundering, not today. You don't have the strength. What you do have is trade. See, winter piracy wasn't all screaming swords and torches. Sometimes it was haggling in frozen fishing towns. Pirates needed food, clothing, salt and booze. Locals needed protection, foreign goods, and occasionally someone to accidentally rob their tax collector. Symbiosis, pirate style. The barter begins. You stand off to the side watching as salted fish changes hands for bullets, wool mittens for knives, and one particularly lumpy bag of apples for a silver crucifix pried off a corpse 2 months back. Everything has value when death by cold and starvation is on the table. You get sent to help carry supplies, barrels of pickled herring, some winter root vegetables, a mysterious sack labelled only in badly spelled Latin, and, to your absolute delight, 2 full casks of dried fruit. Dried, actual fruit, raisins maybe, apple slices, could be anything. You cradle the sack like it's a newborn. One of the villagers, a bent old man with a beard like tangled straw, offers you a strange wooden bowl. Inside is something warm, thick, and beige. You accept it cautiously, sniff, then taste. Parsnip porridge. It's bland, starchy, and about 700 times better than anything you've eaten all month. You devour it like a starved dog and thank him with a grateful grunt. He nods as if to say, "Yeah, I know." Later you learn that pirates in winter often relied on coastal resupplies like this, not just to eat, but to survive emotionally. The ritual of stepping onto dry ground, negotiating with wary but practical villagers, getting a hot meal without catching frostbite, it gave them a brief return to humanity. Not long, but enough. Interestingly, some records even suggest that certain pirate crews formed semi-regular partnerships with wintering ports, offering protection from other pirates in exchange for guaranteed food drops and medical help. Almost like mobsters running protection rackets, but with fewer concrete shoes and more icicles. But scholars still argue over just how common these arrangements were. Some insist that most winter port visits ended in violence, raids, torchings, pillaging. Others say pirates were smart enough to know when to act civilized, especially if they needed to return the next year. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Like most pirate stories, equal parts terror and trade. That night you sleep on land for the first time in weeks, not in a bed of course, the floor of a freezing storage shed, nestled between sacks of grain and a half barrel of turnips. But the walls don't move, and the roof doesn't creak with every gust. That alone is enough to make you weep with gratitude. You're not the only one. Across the village, pirates have wedged themselves into every empty barn, shack and alley. Some snore, some hum lullabies you suspect are older than the town itself. A few light, small, careful fires and toast their boots dry. You hear someone whimper in their sleep. You hear someone else laughing too hard at nothing. The cook manages to barter for a bundle of herbs and some dried garlic, which he declares a miracle. Tomorrow's stew might actually taste like food again. And the villagers? They don't protest. They know the sea gives and takes, and sometimes it coughs up half-dead pirates in need of dinner and dry socks. Could be worse. You drift off to the gentle crackle of fire, the smell of salted fish and wet wool hanging in the air. For once, your belly is fullish, your teeth aren't bleeding, and your boots aren't frozen to your feet. It's not home, but it'll do. You wake up not to the sound of waves or creaking wood, but the far less poetic sound of someone throwing up in a snowbank. The fire in your belly is long gone, replaced with the tight, empty ache that's become all too familiar. The warmth from yesterday's village meal feels like a dream, your body already demanding its next fix. Your breath puffs into the cold air and you sit up, bones protesting, mouth dry. At least you're still on solid ground. For now, but land's generosity doesn't last forever. By noon you're back aboard the ship, sails sluggishly unfurling, the cove behind you shrinking into the snow-lined coast like it was never there. The barrels are fuller now, the crew a little less haunted, but the truth is still bitter and settling in fast. Winter is still far from over. A few of the lads are whispering about something experimental. You sidle up, pretending to inspect the rigging and catch the tail end of the conversation. "Bury the meat in snow," one of them says. "Like the mountain folk do." The other shrugs. "What if it just freezes solid?" "Better than rotting." And there it is, the pirates' answer to refrigeration. The idea spreads quickly. Dig a makeshift snow pantry somewhere on deck, lined with sailcloth and straw, and store the most perishable supplies inside it. Mostly what you've brought back from the village: pickled fish, salted roots, a few jars of who knows what that the cook swore were medicinal. The dried fruits are safe in a box near the captain's quarters, guarded like a sacred relic. But everything else? It goes into the snow hole. You volunteer to help, mostly to keep your mind off your stomach. You and 2 others begin scraping snow off the deck, dragging up frozen chunks from the shadowed side of the ship and packing it into a wooden frame nailed together with rusty nails and hope. It's not elegant, but it's better than nothing. You gently lower a wrapped bundle of pork into the pit, nestle it among the ice, and cover it with straw. The idea is to check it every few days, boil what's needed, and keep the rest as cold as possible. If nothing else, it buys time. Fun fact, cold storage like this wasn't unheard of even for pirates, especially those sailing closer to the Arctic Circle or wintering near Greenlandic or Scandinavian coasts. Vikings used snow to store meat centuries earlier, and medieval seafarers, pirates included, likely picked up the practice through local interactions. It wasn't perfect, and snow could melt or refreeze unpredictably, but it gave you a fighting chance at delaying spoilage. Still, some of the crew remain sceptical. "All we're doing is giving the rats a colder buffet," one mutters as he stomps past. That's a fair point. Rats don't hibernate, they adapt, and the ship has more than a few. You've seen them, scraggly little things with bold eyes and twitching noses, some so fat on scraps you've started considering them as a viable food source. Kidding. Mostly. Later that evening, you return to check the snow pantry. The meat's still there, cold to the touch. No rat bites yet. You breathe a small sigh of relief. Success, for now. But here's the thing about snow, it doesn't always behave. By the 3rd day, a warm front pushes through, just enough to make everything damp. The pantry starts to sweat. You notice condensation beading on the inside of the sailcloth and water pooling at the bottom. You alert the cook. He curses, loudly and colourfully, then orders the whole thing to be repacked with drier snow from the top deck. You do it, fingers freezing, trying not to imagine what will happen when the real thaw comes and you've got 6 pounds of pork slowly turning to soup. This is the tightrope you're walking between preservation and ruin, between nutrition and nausea. And it's not just about food anymore, it's about morale. The snow pantry isn't just meat, it's hope. Which brings us to tonight's open question. Just how effective were these low-tech preservation methods really? Some scholars argue they made a genuine difference. Snowpack storage, if managed carefully and monitored daily, could extend the life of meat by weeks, especially in sub-zero environments. Others suggest it was more of a temporary fix, delaying spoilage by only a few days before dampness or melting rendered the whole effort pointless. Still, in a world without refrigeration, a few extra days could mean everything. That night's meal is surprisingly edible. Not good, let's not get carried away, but edible. The cook uses a portion of the snow-kept pork boiled within an inch of its life and seasoned with dried garlic and something he calls flavour bark, which might be tree bark or might be a clever lie. You chew, cautiously, it's tenderish, a little stringy, but warm and not crawling. Someone even goes so far as to clap the cook on the back. He nearly weeps. You eat slowly, stretching every bite, savouring it like it's the last you'll ever have. Because, let's face it, it might be. You sit in your usual spot, back against a barrel, watching the sky go dark and snow drift lazily across the deck. A few flakes land in your bowl. You don't mind. It's like seasoning, just colder. After dinner, the crew does something unexpected. They start humming. Not singing, no one has the energy for that, but a low, tuneless hum that weaves between them like shared memory. It's soft, barely there, but it's something, a lullaby for the half-frozen. You lean your head back against the wood, belly warm, teeth intact, and, for the first time in days, unworried about what you just ate. Until the snow pantry leaks again. The first blow comes just before dawn, a low, distant thud that doesn't sound like a wave, doesn't sound like wind. You're already half awake, tangled in a damp blanket, when the second one hits. Louder, closer, then shouting, wood splintering, boots on deck, fast and angry. You spring up, groggy but alert, instinctively grabbing your coat and sliding your boots on. Another thud, followed by the unmistakable crack of a barrel top being smashed in. The ship is being boarded, or no, looted, but not by strangers. This is a pirate ship after all. The enemy's already on board. By the time you stumble up to the main deck, it's chaos. A merchant vessel has been cornered, small, slow, clearly not built for winter sailing, and definitely not built to outrun hungry, desperate pirates. Your crew descended on it before sunrise, tethered it to your hull with grappling hooks, and poured across the gap like starved wolves. The merchant sailors didn't even resist. Why would they? Their deck is covered in frost, their faces gaunt, eyes hollow. They look just like you, just colder, just more tired. Now the real frenzy begins. Barrels roll across the deck, crates fly open, the cook is already barking orders. If it smells like death, leave it. If it smells like bread, bring it. Careful with the sacks, you idiot! You jump in, heart pounding, the taste of adrenaline cutting through your dry mouth. Your fingers are stiff, your nose numb, but it doesn't matter. There's food on that ship, and it's either yours or theirs. You pry open a crate and find dried beans, wrapped in cloth and smelling faintly of rosemary. Jackpot. You sling it over your shoulder and run it back across the rope bridge between ships, trying not to look at the merchant crew lined up along their mast. One man is crying. Another glares at you with hatred so sharp it could skin a shark. You look away. Back on your own deck, supplies are stacking high. Dried fruit, salted pork, even a full wheel of cheese. Slightly mouldy, but who cares? It's cheese, actual cheese. A small group gathers around it like it's a sacred relic. Someone tries to swipe a piece. The cook slaps his hand away with a spoon and snarls. Then comes the best surprise yet. A bundle of wrapped flatbreads. Warm to the touch, still soft. Fresh. Someone must have baked these only hours ago. You hold one in both hands like it might vanish if you blink. It smells like flour, butter, and pure undiluted luck. You tear off a bite and close your eyes. For a moment, everything stops. Now let's be clear. Pirates stealing food wasn't unusual. In fact, it was one of the most common acts during a winter raid. Gold and silver were nice, sure, but they wouldn't keep you from starving or freezing. You couldn't eat a coin. Well, you could, but it wouldn't help. Food was the real prize, especially during the colder months when even port towns were running lean. Historical records show that pirates often targeted supply ships during winter, hoping for a hold full of preserved goods rather than luxury items. And some were experts at it. They'd scout shipping lanes, follow weather patterns, even use captured sailors as informants to track which ships carried food instead of textiles or spices. And the quirky fact for today? Some pirate crews employed actual cooks who used to work in royal kitchens, men who knew how to preserve, ration, and prepare food better than most Navy crews. There's even a legend of a pirate chef named Benoit Black Apron Duval who once fended off mutiny with a stew. Supposedly, he whipped up such a glorious meal from spoiled rations and rat meat that the crew spared him just to see what he'd cook next. Historians remain skeptical, but it's a great story. You help move the last of the crates below deck, the ship now groaning with the weight of stolen bounty. Everyone's buzzing, jittery, almost drunk with the thrill of food. Real food. Food you didn't boil out of a barrel or scrape from the inside of a mouldy bag. But nothing's free. By nightfall, you can already see the tension crackling in the air. The merchant crew, now prisoners, have been locked in the lower hold. Some say they should be cut loose. Others argue they should be traded for supplies at the next port. A few suggest darker options. You don't want to think about it. Dinner is, unsurprisingly, the best it's been in weeks. The cook serves up flatbread with a smear of something he swears is butter. Stewed beans with bits of salted pork and, miracle of miracles, a slice of that cheese. It's hard, pungent, and nearly crumbles in your mouth. You eat like a king, the crew eats like wolves. But beneath the feasting there's an edge. Because now you've got food. Which means you've got something worth fighting over. And the sea isn't the only thing that can turn violent when hungry mouths start dreaming of seconds. That night, no one hums, no one sings, they just eat. Quietly, eyes darting, watching. By morning, the feast hangover has settled in. Not the drunken kind, though a few men definitely dipped into the wine barrels the merchant ship so generously contributed, but a different kind of weight. The sluggish, heavy feeling that comes from eating too much. Too fast after too long on too little. Your stomach's making all kinds of sounds, most of them suspicious, and your joints ache like your body can't decide if it's grateful or furious. You're sent to check the snow pantry again, just out of habit, though now with the newly raided supplies, it feels more like a backup plan than the main course. The pork's still there, half frozen and glistening. A few slabs have picked up that slippery grey sheen that says they're dancing on the edge of danger. You set those aside for boiling. At this point, no one's gambling on raw anything. The rats, thankfully, still haven't found it. Or maybe they've been distracted by the newly arrived mountain of loot in the galley. The cook's whistling. That's new, and deeply unsettling. You hear him mumble something about spicing the soup and a bit of chew. You glance at the pot. The broth is bubbling with something unfamiliar. Chunky, stringy, red-tinged. It smells not bad. That alone is suspicious. You dip a spoon in for a taste and pause, the texture hitting you before the flavour does. This isn't pork, or fish, or the mystery meat from last week. It's seal. You blink. The cook grins at you, revealing too many teeth. "From the merchant ship," he says proudly, giving the pot a proud stir. "They had a barrel full, smoked and salted. Bit tough, but you boil it right and it softens up like stew beef." Seal meat. You've heard stories mostly from the older pirates. Crews that ventured far north, past Iceland into Greenland waters, sometimes hunted seals when nothing else was around. Fatty, rich and oily. Seal could feed a whole crew if prepared right, or poison them all if not. Depends on how long it sat and who was doing the boiling. You take another bite. It's greasy but warm. There's a strange sweetness to it, like dark meat marinated in brine and old campfire smoke. It sticks to your ribs in a good way, though your gut is still debating whether this counts as nourishment or a direct insult. Others are eating too, passing bowls between them and nodding in approval. One man says it reminds him of venison. Another says it tastes like guilt. No one's really sure, but here's where things get interesting. Seal hunting among pirates wasn't exactly standard. Some historians argue that it was only the most desperate crews, the ones pushed far north into frozen territories, who bothered. Seals are slippery, quick, and fight back if cornered. And then there's the moral murk. Even by pirate standards, killing a seal, a creature many saw as intelligent, almost dog-like, felt more like butchery than hunting. Still, others point out that pirates weren't known for sentimentality. If it moved and had meat on it, it was fair game. In fact, there are scattered accounts of pirates trading seal pelts with northern indigenous groups in Greenland and Labrador, in exchange for dried fish, whale blubber, and medicinal herbs. A quiet kind of commerce, based not on maps or flags, but survival. Your cook must have learnt the technique somewhere. The meat's not just dumped into the pot. It's sliced thin, soaked first in salt water, then simmered with dried onion and, miracle of miracles, a bit of juniper. Someone traded well in that village port. You sit with your bowl near the stern, letting the steam warm your face and watch the waves roll out into icy grey nothingness. It's eerily calm. The water stretches flat and metallic to the horizon, the wind muffled under a thick, heavy sky. Winter's holding its breath again, waiting for the next storm. That night, you help guard the remaining seal meat. Not from other ships or wild animals, but from your own crew. The captain made it clear. Anyone caught sneaking into the smoked barrels loses a hand. That seems excessive, but after the chaos of last night's loot rush, no one's taking chances. You sit beside the barrels with a knife in your lap and a lantern at your feet, listening to the creak of the hull and the groan of the sails. Every now and then you think you hear footsteps, but it's just the wood shifting, or a rat with delusions of grandeur. Somewhere in the dark, a man coughs, deep and wet. The kind of cough that sounds like something inside is coming loose. It echoes across the deck like a warning. You pull your coat tighter and don't look, because here's the uncomfortable truth. Survival on a pirate ship wasn't just about eating. It was about deciding who eats. Every meal, every portion, every spoonful of stew was a moment of silent negotiation. Seal meat tonight meant your belly was full, but it also meant someone else's wasn't. The prisoners in the lower hold, they didn't get any. Neither did the newest cabin boy who tried to steal a crust of bread and got a black eye for his trouble. There's no democracy when there's only enough for most. So you sit there, guarding your meat, knife resting in your lap like it's part of your hand now. The stars blink out above you one by one, swallowed by a thick curtain of clouds. Snow begins to fall again, fine and slow. You think about the seal, about how it probably had a family, about how none of that mattered the second it got turned into soup. Then you think about tomorrow's meal, and how much you're looking forward to it. The fire's dead. Again, you wake up shivering, wrapped in your coat, your blanket, a sack that once held in onions, and still it's not enough. The inside of your nose is frozen. Your boots are stiff with frost. Even your breath curls upward, like it's trying to abandon ship. Welcome to another morning at sea in winter, where the sun shows up late, and when it does, it barely bothers to shine. Someone's banging at the brazier with a stick, trying to coax out a flame from the buried coals. It's not working. The cook curses loud enough to wake whatever's sleeping in the hold. "We're out of dry wood," he grumbles. Again. And just like that, today's crisis is fire. No one thinks about fear until it's gone. You've had so many problems over the past few weeks, mouldy meat, toothless bull, men, fermented fish, that fire seemed like a constant. But wood, like food, runs out eventually. Especially dry wood. Especially when the wind has been howling non-stop, snow's been blowing sideways for days, and everything is soaked in salt spray. You and a few others get the unfortunate task of finding fuel, which means crawling into the belly of the ship to dig through storage, ropes, broken planks, anything that might burn without choking the crew on black smoke. You pull up a splintered crate and give it a sniff, damp but manageable. You add it to the pile. Another man drags out an old oar snapped clean in two. "Better a fire than a paddle," he says with a half smile. No one laughs. Eventually you have enough kindling to get the brazier going. It takes 3 men huffing on the coals like bellows, but finally it catches. Thin pale flames flicker up. The heat is barely enough to warm your fingertips, but it's heat. You'll take it. This might be a good time to mention something most pirate stories leave out. Fire is dangerous at sea. Ridiculously dangerous. Ships were floating fire hazards. Dry wood, tarred ropes, open sails, barrels of rum and oil, a spark in the wrong place and you'd be cooking more than dinner. That's why fire was kept small, controlled, and far from anything that mattered. Most cooking was done on a brazier, essentially a metal box of coals, and even that was placed on stone slabs or wet sand in case it tried something stupid. And during winter, fire was more than comfort. It was survival. Not just for cooking, but for fingers, toes, morale. A cold crew is a slow crew, a frozen crew is a dead one. Which brings us to today's menu. Broth. Again, but this time there's a twist. The cook adds something from the last raid. Dried lentils maybe, or peas, or, as he calls them, round green knot beans. You watch them tumble into the pot, followed by chunks of seal meat, a pinch of dried garlic, and a splash of vinegar. No one knows where he got vinegar. No one asks. The smell is better than the taste, but you eat anyway. You're not here for flavour, you're here for calories. The soup is hot, which already makes it top tier, and after 2 spoonfuls your insides start to defrost just enough that you remember how to feel again. Now, while we're on the subject of cold, let's talk about another neglected element of pirate life. Frostbite. You know that tingly feeling in your toes? That pins and needles sensation that turns into numbness? That's not just the cold, that's your body quietly giving up on keeping its extremities alive. Fingers, toes, ears, all fair game. You've seen it happen. A man goes to sleep with wet boots, wakes up with the purple feet. 2 days later they're black. 3 days later he is learning to walk without them. There's one sailor on board, no one knows his real name, but they call him Stumps. Lost 2 fingers and a toe during a winter voyage 5 years ago. Now he just claps his hands together like he's trying to remember what having all 10 was like. He's still faster on a rope than half the crew. No one talks about losing body parts, but everyone's thinking about it. So here's today's scholarly debate. How did pirate crews actually manage fires during winter? Some claim there were elaborate systems for cooking on deck, stone-lined fireboxes, covered braziers, even rotating duty rosters to monitor sparks. Others say it was chaos. Fire wherever it could be safely lit, or not so safely, depending on the desperation level. There are even conflicting records from the same era, some praising certain pirate ships for their disciplined heat management, others describing accidental fires that mysteriously happened after unpopular officers vanished. As you finish your soup, the cook leans over the brazier and sighs. "This is the last of the wood," he says flatly. "Next storm, we'll have to burn rope." You blink. "Rope?" He shrugs. "Burns smoky, but better than freezing." And yes, that's a real thing. When fuel ran out, pirates burned what they had. Rope, tarred cloth, even the slats from broken barrels, anything to keep the fire going just long enough to cook or stay alive. The smoke filled the lower deck with the kind of fumes that peeled paint off the walls, but no one cared if it meant soup. That night, you sleep with your hands tucked between your knees, your coat pulled over your head like a second skin. The fire is down to embers. The cold is creeping in through the seams. Every creak of the hull sounds like a crack in your bones. You close your eyes and dream of things you haven't felt in weeks. A hot brick wall, a summer wind, sunlight that doesn't stab you in the face. Tomorrow you'll wake up cold again. But tonight, for a few hours, you're warm. You wake up coughing, not your usual morning hack from breathing cold, wet air all night, but something deeper, thicker. Your throat feels like someone poured sand down it and stirred. It burns, not the fever kind, though that might be coming. This is a different fire, familiar, one you tasted once before the night you drank too much rum and fell asleep with your face in the cook's old socks, except now the socks are in your lungs. You stumble toward the deck for fresh air, clutching your ribs like they're trying to escape. You're not alone. Half the crew is hacking, groaning, wheezing like chimney flues. A pale haze hangs in the air. Rope smoke, tar smoke. Whatever they fed the fire last night, it's poisoned the whole underdeck. The cook's got the brazier going again, and this time something's boiling. Something strong. It smells herbal, sharp, peppery, and almost sweet. You walk toward it like a moth toward a flame, hoping it's tea, medicine, or both. He hands you a small wooden cup. Cough syrup, he says simply. You stare into it. It's thick and dark, steaming gently. Bits of bark and wilted leaves float at the top like a witch's salad. You hesitate. Go on, he grunts. It's either this or wait for your lungs to walk off without you. You drink. It's awful. Hot, bitter, and burns twice. Once going down and again when it lands in your gut. But within moments your throat relaxes, the coughing fades just a little, and your head clears enough to feel grateful. Rum base, the cook says proudly, holding up a small clay bottle. Bit of licorice root, clove too. If we had honey, you'd be crying tears of joy. You're already crying, but from the clove. This is how pirates treated illness in the dead of winter, whatever they could scrape together. There were no ship doctors with diplomas, no chemists brewing proper tinctures, just whatever herbs they could scavenge, trade, or steal, mixed into the one thing they did have in abundance: alcohol. Rum was antiseptic, numbing, warming. Combine it with something vaguely medicinal and boom, pirate NyQuil. You spend the rest of the morning sucking on a piece of bark the cook insists will keep the lungs open. It tastes like mud and menthol, but your cough doesn't come back, so maybe he's not entirely lying. Others aren't so lucky. Below deck, a few of the crew have developed the dreaded wet wheeze, the rattle in the chest that it means trouble. One man is wrapped in blankets and sweating hard. Another can't stand without vomiting. The air below smells of sick and despair. You wonder how many of them will make it to spring. But pirates weren't helpless. There was a strange, scrappy kind of medicine on board, rooted in folklore, experience, and desperation. Garlic, when you had it, was chewed raw. Onion skins were soaked and are made into poultices. Mustard seeds, when mixed with vinegar, were rubbed on chests to chase out the lung demons, according to one older crewmate. Yes, he actually said that, and no one questioned it. One quirky trick used by some crews: heated stones. You'd bake a rock in the brazier, wrap it in cloth, and press it to your chest or under your blanket. It worked like a heating pad, drawing out chills, or, if you weren't careful, just gave you a bonus burn to complain about. And here's your weird historical fact of the day. In certain parts of the world, pirates believed in smoke therapy, literally standing over a smoky fire, breathing in fumes from burning herbs or even resinous tree sap. It sounds counterintuitive, and often was, but some swore it chased out colds, dampness, or evil spirits. It also gave everyone a cough and made your clothes smell like burnt incense for a week. That afternoon, a small crew is dispatched ashore. Again. There's a rocky outcrop nearby, a spot the captain believes might still have wild herbs, or at least something better than smoking rope fibres for warmth. You're picked for the mission. Probably because you're upright and not coughing blood. The trek is cold, brutal and long. Ice crunches underfoot, the wind slicing through every layer. But just before sunset, you strike gold. Or green, rather. A patch of low-growing herbs tucked into a rocky crevice. Dull green leaves, oval-shaped, with a strong smell when crushed. The old man in the crew grins when he sees it. Time, he says, practically reverent. Old winter remedy. You gather it up, every stem, every leaf, and pack it into a sack. On the way back you find dried berries on thorny bushes, bitter but not deadly. They go in the sack too. By the time you return, the wind has picked up. Snow is coming, fast, hard, and heavy. but the cook is grinning like you handed him gold. That night's cough syrup gets an upgrade. The thyme softens the flavour. The berries add a tart edge, and the rum, well, it's still doing the heavy lifting. You get your share, drink it down, and this time it almost tastes good. A few of the sick men perk up. One even eats a spoonful of porridge without vomiting. That's a victory. And just like that, the mood on board shifts. A little. No one's healed, no one's warm. But for the first time in days, no one's actively dying. You fall asleep with the faint scent of thyme and rum still lingering in your nose, and your lungs, for once, don't feel like they're about to crawl out of your chest and toss themselves overboard. You'll call that a win. It starts with a whistle. Not the wind, not a call from the crow's nest, just a long, low note from a man leaning against the railing with a goblet in his hand and a smirk on his face. You've seen him before, but never up close. He's one of those pirates who doesn't do much unless it involves talking, drinking, or throwing knives at a barrel for entertainment. No frostbite, no bruises, no cough. Just rings on his fingers, a perfectly trimmed beard, and a pouch of something sweet-smelling always dangling from his belt. "Join me?" he asks, raising the goblet toward you like he's offering a toast, not a trap. You hesitate. You've eaten worse things than whatever's in that cup. You've survived worse things, so you walk over, cold boots dragging, and take the goblet. It's wine, real wine, not vinegar, not spoiled or mixed with rainwater or thick with mould, just wine. You take a sip, sweet, strong, a little sharp on the tongue, like dried cherries had a baby with old wood and too much sun. It burns a little on the way down, but compared to the cough syrup, it's velvet. "Fortified," the man says, grinning, "keeps the cold off, helps with digestion, and," he adds, leaning in slightly, "makes you forget the flavour of a salted fish stew. For a few minutes, anyway." You nod slowly, taking another sip, wondering where this miracle came from. His name is Bastian, and according to him, he's lived off nothing but dried figs and fortified wine for the last 3 weeks. You nearly choke. "Figs?" He laughs. A deep, rich sound that seems wildly out of place on a ship full of frostbitten criminals. "Figs. The captain hates them, so they're all mine. I trade when I need meat, but mostly I just sip and chew. Works well enough." You glance down at his pouch. He unties it and offers you one. You take it. Why not? It's wrinkled, leathery, smells like syrup and wood. And when you bite into it, it's soft and sticky, sweet as honey and sharp as vinegar. Your mouth floods with saliva. You weren't ready. You haven't tasted fruit in so long your tongue is staging a protest. You eat the whole fig, then another. Bastian just watches, amused. "They last forever," he says. "Don't rot, keep you regular. And pirates never think to loot the dried fruit first." And he's right. The sacks of figs, dates, prunes, if any made it onto the ship during raids, were usually pushed aside for barrels of pork or crates of biscuit. But these little gems, they were gold in disguise. Turns out Bastian's got a stash of these goodies. Not much. A few pounds tucked in canvas and sealed tight with wax. And a handful of bottles, fortified wine mostly, probably stolen from some coastal monastery and hidden before the quartermaster could divvy them up. You don't ask where he keeps it. You don't want to know. You sit with him for a while, sipping, chewing, the cold gnawing less urgently at your bones. He tells you stories, probably lies, about sailing in Sicily, meeting a nun who cursed him, and hiding figs in his boots to smuggle them across customs. You laugh more than you expect to. For a few minutes you're not starving or freezing or wondering when your fingers will fall off. You're just sitting, talking, tasting things that don't hurt your mouth. And that brings us to today's quirky little detail. Dried fruits weren't just snacks, they were medicine. Medieval sailors believed figs cured everything from constipation to melancholy. Prunes were considered gut balancers, and dates were said to warm the blood. Combined with fortified wine, wine strengthened with brandy or distilled spirits, you had a sailor's version of an elixir. Sweet, calorie-dense, long-lasting, and packed with enough sugar and vitamins to keep scurvy at bay just a little longer. But here's the kicker. Historians are divided on how common this really was among pirates. Some argue that dried fruits were too valuable and rare to make it to pirate ships. Others point to merchant logs showing regular shipments of figs and dates to northern ports, cargo that pirates definitely intercepted. There's even a tale of a French pirate named Larousse who insisted on starting every winter morning with a fig soaked in wine for his constitution. Whether it worked or not is lost to history, but he apparently lived to be 60, which is practically immortal by pirate standards. Back on deck, you're feeling something suspiciously close to content. The wine's warming your insides. The figs have left a sticky sweet coating on your teeth. For the first time in days, your body doesn't feel like it's eating itself. Then a bell rings. The cook's calling for dinner. Bastian groans. "I suppose the dream ends," he says, draining his goblet and standing. The meal is stew. Of course it's stew. Probably beans and pork again. But you carry a fig in your coat pocket like a secret. After dinner, while everyone else grumbles and picks at their teeth, you sneak off to the stern, pull it out and take a bite. It tastes like defiance. You sleep that night under the stars, wrapped in every layer you own. Stomach full enough, throat warm, and something sweet still lingering on your tongue. You dream of fig trees, and you don't cough once. You knew it was doomed the moment you saw someone watering the onions. Not metaphorically, literally. A young deckhand, maybe 15, proudly tipping a wooden ladle over a barrel of dirt like he was tending a royal garden. He looks up at you, grinning, cheeks red from cold and optimism, and says, "Gonna grow us some greens." You just nod, because it's cruel to crush hope when it's the only thing keeping a person from collapsing into despair. Still, you know how this ends. The barrel garden is one of the newer ideas brought to life out of desperation and boredom. Someone, probably the quartermaster, decided that scurvy prevention could be solved with a little ingenuity and some spare soil they'd looted from the last coastal town. They set up a half barrel filled with dirt, stuck in a few sprouted onions from the bottom of a sack, and lashed it to the deck with rope to stop it from tipping over during storms. It looks pathetic, but you have to admit, it's a nice fantasy. Green things growing, life on a ship surrounded by death. Problem is, the barrel sits in the sunless cold all day, battered by salt wind, coated in frost most mornings. The soil is barely soil, more like clumpy grey mud with the nutritional value of dust. And despite the deckhand's best efforts, the onions aren't growing. They're dying in slow motion, green shoots curling in on themselves like they know what's coming. By the end of the week, the leaves are wilted, one is clearly moulding, and the lad has stopped watering them. Now he just sits beside the barrel like a mourner. Welcome to the tragedy of the ship garden. Historically, the idea wasn't unheard of. Some long-haul ships, especially those travelling far from port, did try to grow herbs or small vegetables on board. Onions, leeks, mustard greens, things that could sprout in barrels or pots. But those were ships with more space, more sun, and far more patience. Pirate ships, particularly in winter, didn't exactly scream agriculture experiment. Still, the attempt reveals something else. Something less about nutrition and more about morale. A green sprout in a world of grey sea and grey sky meant something. It said, "We're not dead yet, even if you couldn't eat it, even if it died before it bloomed." You bring the boy a dried fig later that day. Don't say anything, just hand it over. He nods like he understands what it means. Of course, the rest of the crew isn't so sentimental. When the cook finally dumps the barrel overboard, soil, onions, dead dreams and all, someone makes a joke about the world's shortest harvest. Another suggests they fish it out and serve it as onion water stew. Everyone laughs a little too hard. Food that night is worse than usual, which feels like an accomplishment. Whatever meat was left from the merchant raid has started to sour. The cooks tried to mask it with pepper and juniper, but it still has that slick, sour edge that makes your stomach tense before you even swallow. You eat it anyway. You've stopped being picky. But the failure of the barrel garden hangs heavy over dinner. There's a mood, something dark and unspoken, like everyone was rooting for it, even if no one admitted it. That one little burst of colour on the ship, gone. Just another thing the sea takes. Later you find yourself staring at the empty corner of the deck where the barrel used to sit. There's a dark wet circle on the boards, like a bruise. The boy who watered it hasn't said a word in hours. He's just tying knots in a length of rope, over and over, like he's trying to keep his fingers busy enough to forget. You wonder how many other ships tried and failed to grow something during winter. Probably more than you'd think. There's not much written about the subject. Most accounts focus on battles, treasure, mutinies, not dead onions. But some historians have found traces, mention of leaf pots in journals, or herb bundles hung near galleys. One ship supposedly carried a potted lemon tree, passed down between captains like a family heirloom. Another had rows of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. Rosemary, thyme, even mint. Not to grow, but to chew on or steep in hot water. Pirate tea, if you will. Even the British Navy centuries later would encourage shipboard gardens. But for pirates, things were simpler and bleaker. If you were lucky enough to loot vegetables, you ate them. If you weren't, you dreamed of them while gnawing on biscuit ends. So here's your open question. Did ship gardens ever really work? Or were they just a sailor's fantasy? Scholars debate it. Some say yes in rarer cases. With enough care, sun and cleverness, you could grow enough herbs to stave off scurvy for a few lucky mouths. Others say no, that the cold, salt and endless motion made it a losing battle. That anything green was doomed before it started. Tonight you dream of fields. Not a lush paradise, nothing soft and storybook, just a patch of dirt with real soil where onions grow tall and fat, and no one dumps the garden overboard because it's taking up space. You wake to snow on your face, and the boy still tying knots. There's a sharp crack just after dawn, a kind of snap that echoes through the ship like a musket shot. You bolt upright, heart-thumping, half-dreaming of cannon fire, only to realise it's just Barlow trying to bite into a sea biscuit. He spits the half-chewed chunk onto the deck and curses with the full, colourful creativity of a man who's been betrayed by his breakfast. "Cracked a bloody tooth," he growls, holding his jaw with one hand and shaking the other like he's trying to throw the biscuit overboard through sheer force of will. Welcome back to hardtack, your old flavourless enemy. It's been nearly 2 weeks since the last decent meal. The raid spoils have dwindled, the seal meat is long gone, the snow pantry gave up during a surprise thaw and turned half the meat into soup and the other half into something unmentionable. And now the fallback food of fallback foods is back in rotation. You pick up your own biscuit and sigh. It looks like a stone, feels like a stone. You could probably use it as one in a fight. And the name Sea Biscuit is far too gentle for what it actually is. This is hardtack, baked in hell, left out to dry for days, and jigged in a barrel, until it forgets how to be food. You knock it against the railing. It makes a sound like tapping a brick. Someone passes around a tin of water. You dunk your biscuit, as per tradition, hoping to soften it. The water does nothing. You dunk again. Still rock so solid. You chew the corner anyway and instantly regret it. It tastes like dust, mould and regret. Still you eat it, because it's food. Technically. Hardtack is the ultimate survival ration. Just flour, water and thyme, no yeast, no fat, no flavour. Baked until it's as hard as possible, then stored in barrels that could, under ideal conditions, last for years. Not months, years. There are accounts of sailors eating hardtack that was older than they were. Break it open, knock out the worms, maybe soak it in soup or beer, and you were good to go. Well, good is a stretch. The problem is that your current batch has gone off. Not spoiled, it doesn't spoil, not in the traditional sense, but stale in a way that makes it taste like you're licking an old church pew. Some of the biscuits have small black spots, probably mould. Others have holes. Worm tunnels, classic. You break yours in half and see the unmistakable sign, a tiny wriggling stowaway in the centre. Still alive, still twitching. You flick it into the sea, not out of disgust, but because you're trying to stay ahead of the rest of the crew. You know someone will joke about it. Or worse, just eat it anyway. Old Barlow calls them sea raisins. You try not to vomit. And this leads to today's weird little fact. The worms in hardtack weren't always considered a problem. Some sailors believed they added protein. Others just ate around them. And in the worst cases, when rations were so low there was no choice, they were eaten without hesitation. Extra crunch, if you're into that. Even some pirates, for all their ruthlessness and rebellion, couldn't escape the tyranny of hardtack. It was one of the few foodstuffs that could be stolen in bulk, stored without fuss, and still be edible 3 ports later. Well, edible being a flexible term. Some crews tried to spice it up, literally. Dunking in broth, frying it in animal fat if they had any, crumbling it into what passed for porridge, anything to dull the texture or trick the mouth into thinking it was eating something else. You sit beside the mast with your biscuit and a tin cup of something that might be tea, hot water with a wilted leaf in it. The combination doesn't improve the biscuit, but it keeps your hands warm. Barely. The boy who lost his onion barrel is nearby, chewing in silence. His biscuit has a split down the middle. He pries it open like a clam. Inside mould, grey, grunt and fuzzy. He closes it again without a word and keeps chewing the outer edges. And here's where the scholarly argument kicks in. How much of a role did hardtack really play in pirate diets? Some historians say it was central. that despite the flashy reputation of pirates raiding merchant ships and pillaging gold, what they really wanted was provisions, especially long-lasting carbs like biscuit. Others argue that pirates hated hardtack and only resorted to it when absolutely necessary, preferring fresh food, dried meat, or stolen grain. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. When pirates couldn't get fresh, they took biscuit. When biscuit ran low, they raided. When raiding failed, they chewed and prayed. Back in the present, someone finally makes a joke. "I miss the worm meat," mutters a voice near the bow. The cook doesn't laugh. He's too busy sharpening a knife with a look that suggests the next man to complain will be part of tomorrow's stew. Dinner that night is, predictably, hardtack again. This time soaked in weak broth until it becomes a kind of mush. The texture is better, the flavour still non-existent. But at least it goes down without chipping anything. You lie in your hammock after, belly heavy with biscuit mush, staring at the wooden ceiling and wondering how many teeth you've left. 5, 10, does it matter? You dream of bread, real bread, warm and soft, torn by hand and slathered in butter. You wake up chewing the corner of your blanket. You don't know what time it is. There's no sky down here, just darkness, thick, damp, and pressing in on you like the walls are shrinking. You hear the sea above in dull, booming thuds, like someone rolling barrels across the deck. You try to stretch, but your shoulders hit something solid. A beam? You twist your legs, more wood. There's a puddle under your hip, and it's not water. Not fresh, anyway. You exhale slowly, and the breath fogs in front of your face. Welcome to the brig. You're not entirely sure what got you tossed in here. Maybe it was that sarcastic comment about the cook's soup being seasoned with despair. Or maybe someone needed space, and you looked like you could survive a few hours in the dark. Either way, here you are, below deck, crammed into a wooden box barely wide enough to sit in, let alone stand. It smells like old fish, spoiled vinegar and mildew, and you're starting to understand why the rats left. There's a bucket in the corner. You don't want to know what it's for, but your body's already figured it out. Your stomach growls, not just a rumble, an angry, twisted gnash of emptiness. The last meal was biscuit mush 2 days ago. Since then, the cook's been rationing what's left. 2 bowls of thin broth for the whole crew yesterday, and this morning, nothing. The storm blew in hard last night, and half the supplies got soaked. The fire's out, the water barrel's tipped, and no one's lighting anything until the gale dies down. That means no food, no light, no warmth. And you're down here, in the hole, like a forgotten sack of potatoes. You shift, trying not to think about how cold your fingers are, or how numb your toes feel, or how your mouth tastes like mould. You try not to think about the fact that you're more hungry than you've ever been in your life, and that there's no end in sight. Your mind starts to wander. You think of the last real meal you had. Was it the seal meat? The stew with the figs? That slice of cheese? You remember it like a dream, sharp, delicious, and completely out of reach now. You wonder how long a man can go without food before he starts to slip. Not just physically, but mentally. You try to count the days, but they blur. Was it 4 since the last real dinner? Or 5? There's movement near your feet. You flinch. A rat, maybe. Or a crewmate down in the hold with you. You squint through the dark. A figure shifts in the opposite cell. A blur of shadow and ragged breathing. He hasn't spoken since you got tossed down here. You're not even sure if he's alive. You lie back against the wall and let your thoughts drift. It's dangerous, this kind of hunger. It eats more than your gut. It takes your sense of time, of identity. You start to think about things you shouldn't. Things like, what if someone up top doesn't make it? What happens to their rations? What happens to them? Kitimum. You shake the thought off. Or try to. There are stories, of course. Always stories. About ships stranded for weeks in northern ice. About crews that dwindled mysteriously. About men who went overboard and were never seen again. And the cook, always the cook, managing to stretch the stew with something extra. You had never believed them before. Now, locked in this dark little box, your stomach roaring like a beast. You start to understand how the impossible becomes unthinkable. Which brings us to tonight's not-so-cosy historical footnote. Hunger breaks people. Not just bones or bodies, morality. There are records, some reliable, some whispered, that hint at cannibalism on long, desperate sea voyages, particularly during brutal winters, not pirates alone, naval crews, explorers, even whalers. When the food runs out, the frost creeps in, man, and the rats vanish. What's left? Some historians say it's all rumour, sea horror stories meant to scare the greenhorns. Others, they believe the truth is more gruesome than any story could capture, especially on ships like these. Lawless, isolated, cold. You close your eyes and try to sleep, though you're not sure sleep is even possible in this freezing wooden coffin. You dream half-dreams, figs, bread, a hot fire, the face of the boy with the onion barrel. Oh, he's smiling, then he's gone. You wake to the creak of the hatch opening. A shaft of light cuts through the dark like a blade. Someone tosses something in. It thuds beside your foot. A biscuit, stale, cracked, probably dropped. You grab it fast, barely registering what it is before biting down. It's awful, dry, dense, and tastes like dirt. You don't care. You chew like a starving animal, barely breathing between bites. Then the hatch slams shut. Darkness again. You lie back, crumbs in your beard, teeth aching, mouth dry. But you're not hungry anymore, just cold. So cold. By the time they let you out of the brig, the storm has passed, but the sky is still sulking. Thick, slate-grey clouds hang low, spitting icy drizzle that seeps through your coat and makes every breath feel like inhaling wet wool. You're stiff, sore, and blinking against the pale morning light like some ghost dredged up from the bilge. No one welcomes you back. You pull yourself upright, legs shaky, or hands like ice-carved claws, and climb to the deck in silence. Around you, the crew is barely moving. Faces drawn, eyes sunken, lips cracked. It's as if the ship itself has aged overnight. The storm knocked out more than the sails. It stole something quieter. Energy, hope, warmth. What's left is a crew of half-starved men, too tired to be angry and too hungry to care. The cook is working on something. You recognise the pot, the fire, the familiar hopeless clatter of tin ladles and sighs. He's got the brazier going again somehow, with a weak little flame that flickers defiantly in the wind. The pot on top rattles gently, steam curling from its edges, carrying a smell that's confusing, savoury, meaty, but also sour, earthy and strangely metallic. You don't ask what it is. You wait your turn, hold out your bowl, and accept the portion in silence. It's hot at least. That's more than you expected. You take a sip, then a bite. It's soup, if you're being generous. A thick gelatinous stew full of unidentifiable bits, some soft and mushy, others stringy and rubbery. You find a few beans, a sliver of turnip, what might be seaweed, and something that looks suspiciously like a scrap of leather. You chew, slowly, deliberately, because the alternative is asking questions. This, you realise, is pirate soup du jour. The whatever we have left special. The cook must have scraped the bottom of every barrel, every sack, and maybe even a boot or two, just to stretch a meal out of thin air and wishful thinking. There's a richness to the broth that suggests something fatty was boiled down for hours. Bones, maybe, or cartilage. You try not to think about what animal it came from, or if it was an animal. You dip your spoon again, bring up a chunk of something, grey. You poke it, it jiggles, then you eat it. Because hunger is a funny thing. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't care about texture, or ethics, or the fact that you're chewing what might have once been part of a shoe. It only wants calories, heat, anything to fill that hollow in your gut where reason used to live. Across the deck, a few of the men are doing the same. Heads down, spoons working, no talking, just chewing, swallowing, surviving. Then someone asks the question, is that leather? You don't look up. You don't answer. The cook hears it though, he barks a laugh. Boiled boot, he says, too proud. Found one down in storage. Cut the sole clean off. Tougher than pork. But it don't rot. He's not joking. And here's the truly unsettling part. Boiled leather wasn't uncommon in dire times. Historical accounts from shipwreck survivors, stranded explorers, even castle sieges all mention it. Cutting strips of shoe leather, boiling it for hours to soften it, scraping off dirt and nails and anything you didn't want to swallow. It didn't offer much nutrition, but it was something, collagen maybe. A bit of fat if you were lucky, some even seasoned it with seawater and vinegar. Proper pirate consommé. You finish your bowl. It sits like a brick in your belly, but at least it's there. Something solid, something warm. You lean back against the mast, wrap your coat tighter, and close your eyes for a moment. The drizzles turn to sleet now, pinpricks of ice bouncing off the deck. Your hands throb from cold. Your knees ache and your second stomach mugs, an uneasy gurgle, but you're not as empty as you were yesterday, and that's a victory. Of course, the mood on deck is fragile. The soup did its job, filled the hole, dulled the sharpest hunger, but it didn't do much for morale. A man can eat boot stew, sure, but he doesn't feel good about it. Someone mutters about the captain having stores hidden in his quarters. Others wonder aloud about the prisoners still in the brig, and whether they're getting fed. It's the kind of talk that starts small but spreads like fire in dry straw. You hear one man mention salt pork, another swears he saw the cook with a secret tin, and someone else, not joking, says they'd eat a rat if it showed up now. Which brings us to today's historical debate. Just how often did pirates' crews resort to this kind of desperation? Some scholars say it was rare, that most pirates avoided the deep north in winter, kept close to trade routes, and stole what they needed before things got this grim. Others argue that these moments, boiled leather, bone broth, soup made from anything, were more common than anyone wanted to admit. Because the sea is indifferent, because winter is brutal, and because no matter how many ships you raid, there are always weeks when there's nothing left. You sit quietly and listen to the crew eat. The wind whistles through the rigging like it's laughing. That night, the storm returns, not with thunder or lightning, but with that creeping cold that makes the boards groan. You lie in your hammock, clutching your coat, listening to the creak of the ship and the slosh of your stomach trying to figure out what you just fed it. You close your eyes and try to imagine a tavern. Wood smoke, bread baking, something roasted on a spit. Butter, cheese, a mug of ale, a chair that doesn't sway, a meal that doesn't squeak when you chew it. You smile even as your belly lurches, because hey, at least it wasn't rat. Yet. The story starts in whispers. Low, careful murmurs passed across the deck like hot coals. No one says it directly, at least not at first. Not in daylight. Not where the cook or the quartermaster might hear. But you catch snatches of it. Cape Horn, icebound, no food left, no one talks about what really happened. And then, the quietest line of all, hissed like a secret curse. They ate the Pippin boy. You laugh when you first hear it. Not because it's funny, but because it sounds like every sailor's ghost tale, meant to spook the green ones. Pastime on cold nights, maybe make someone drop their spoon during supper. But no one's laughing when it's told. The eyes are too still, the tone too flat. It's not a joke, it's a warning. It happened 2 winters ago, they say. A pirate ship, nameless now, trapped in Antarctic waters near the Horn after a greedy captain pushed too far chasing a Spanish galleon. Storms hit hard, winds cracked the mast, and the ship was driven into ice so thick they couldn't sail or row out. They tried burning rope, then barrels, then the oars. They ran out of food, then they ran out of rats. Then they started looking at each other. The story goes the first to go was a boy, maybe 12 or 16, depends on who's telling it. Died of cold, supposedly, but when the cook boiled soup the next night, there were no questions, just empty bowls and shawls. That's the part that sticks with you, not the death, but the silence. You don't believe it. Not really. But you also don't not believe it, because lately hunger's become something sharp, not just a dull ache. It's a blade now, scraping ribs, hollowing your face, curling your spine, and you see it in the eyes of the crew, the way they glance at each other a little longer than usual, the way laughter has vanished, replaced with brittle nods and grunts. You caught yourself staring too long at someone's arm the other day, not in a way that made sense, just wondering, measuring. That's how it starts. You pull your coat tighter, shake off the thoughts and move to the bow, where the sea crashes steady and cold against the ship's hull. You watch the horizon, the endless grey, the flat line of nothing. You haven't seen another ship in days. No birds, no fish, just sky and sea and the creaking of a ship growing weaker underfoot. By midday the cook announces dinner with no enthusiasm, just a grunt. He lifts the pot lid like a man confessing a sin. The soup inside is colourless. No meat, just water thickened with biscuit crumbs, bean fragments, and one lone sprig of dried rosemary, floating like it died trying. You eat it. Of course you do. You slurp every drop. Afterward the whispers return, louder now. Someone says he saw the captain pull something from the hold that wasn't on the manifest. Another claims the prisoners are gone. One swears the cook has a secret stash, but of what he won't say. That night, someone retells the Cape Horn tale in full. No more whispers, no more pretending it's a myth. This time it's told like scripture. The voice is quiet, steady, almost reverent. They had no wood left to boil the bones, just cracked them open, raw, sucked to the marrow. Said it was warm, sweet. You feel your stomach twist, not from horror, but from something far worse, curiosity. There's a debate among historians about these stories, of course. The scholarly types argue endlessly, was cannibalism among pirates real or just maritime legend? Most agree it probably happened, though rarely. Desperate winters, lost ships, ice-locked routes with no rescue. In those moments, civilization peels away. All that's left is instinct, and hunger, and a cook who's run out of onions. But the written records are murky. No pirate captain wanted to admit his crew ate itself to survive. So the evidence lives in rumours, old ship logs with pages missing, and coded language like, the meat lasted longer than expected. You try to sleep that night, but the cold bites hard and the wind sings sharp through the sails. You lie in your hammock with a bowl of warm water in your belly and a head full of bones cracking open. When you wake up, there's a new smell in the air. Something rich, meaty. You sit up fast. The cook's ladling out something thick, brown, aromatic. The kind of stew you haven't seen in weeks. Everyone's gathered, bowls out, eyes wide and eager. The cook's face is unreadable. Just motion, ladle, bowl. You step forward, hold out your bowl. He hesitates for a moment. Just a second. Then he fills it. You stare down into it. It's meat for sure. Tender, dark, maybe pork, maybe not. No one asks where it came from. No one says a word. You eat it. You say it. Because you're starving. Because it's hot. Because asking questions out here isn't just dangerous. It's rude. And because some stories are better left as stories, even if they're true. You're still thinking about that stew. It's been 3 days and the memory won't let go. Not because of what it was, though that's its own kind of haunting, but because of what it wasn't. It didn't taste like pork or fish or bird or anything you could name. It was other. Heavy, sweet in a way that clung to your tongue. The kind of flavour your body recognises but your brain refuses to label. And now, even with a little bread in your hand, you can still feel it in the back of your throat, like smoke. The weather's finally turned, though better is a relative term. The snow has stopped falling sideways and started falling straight down, in delicate flakes that make the deck look almost peaceful. If you ignore the smell of unwashed bodies and the sound of coughing below deck, you wrap your coat tight and try to think of anything that isn't stew, which is exactly when you hear the quartermaster shouting from the port side, "Land! I see land!" The cry spreads like fire through the crew. Men scramble to the rails, boots slipping, faces lighting up with something you haven't seen in weeks. Hope. You follow, pushing through the tangle of bodies, and there it is, a thin white coastline in the distance, broken with dark rocks and a hint of smoke. Civilization, or at least people. You can almost taste the salt and salvation already. The captain confirms it through his spyglass. A cluster of dwellings near the shore, small fires, and figures moving across the snow. Inuit? Maybe, he mutters, voice low. Or Sami. Traders, if we're lucky. Yo, feel the ship's mood shift instantly. Talk of trade, food, warmth, actual human contact. Not raiding this time, not fighting, just bartering for survival. Even pirates know when the sea's beaten them into civility. By dusk, you're ashore again, trudging through knee-high snow behind the captain and a handful of crew. The air is sharp enough to cut skin, but it smells clean, crisp, real. It's the first air you've breathed in weeks that doesn't reek of rot or despair. Ahead, the figures by the fire stand waiting, wrapped in furs, silent, watchful. Their faces are unreadable, eyes bright with caution, but not fear. The captain raises a hand in greeting. The oldest of the locals steps forward, says something in a language that rolls like gravel. The quartermaster replies in broken trade speech, gestures toward your empty packs, your thin arms, your hollow bellies. It doesn't take long for understanding to settle. They invite you to sit. You sink beside the fire, warmth licking at your boots, and for the first time in months you smell something good. The air is thick with the scent of smoked fish, seal oil, and something sweet, maybe dried berries. A bowl is pressed into your hands. You glance up, unsure, but the man who gave it just nods once, a small smile ghosting across his lips. You take a bite. It's incredible. Smoked fish, tender and rich. Soaked in broth thickened with fat and herbs you don't recognize. A little salty, a little sweet. Each bite melts on your tongue. You close your eyes for a second, savouring it, and when you open them, you notice everyone else, your crew, the locals eating the same way, slowly, gratefully. No one talks. It feels almost sacred. You learn later that the dish is called muktuk, whale skin and blubber, rich in oil and nutrients. It tastes better than it sounds, though you're not sure if that's because it's genuinely delicious or because you're half dead with hunger. Either way, it fills you like no stew or biscuit ever could. It makes you feel alive again. After dinner, the two groups trade. Metal for meat, fabric for dried fish, salt for blubber. The locals are practical, friendly, but cautious. You get the sense they've done this before, helped lost sailors and pirates alike. They don't ask what you're doing this far north. They don't need to. The sea always drives men to strange places. As night falls, you huddle near the fire, watching the stars reappear through the yays. One of the local hunters sits beside you, sharpening a knife made from bone and iron. He gestures toward the sea, says something soft, it's almost like a prayer. The translator explains, he thanks the whale for its gift. Everything eats everything. That is the way. You nod. The words sit heavy in your chest. You glance around at your crew, faces warm in the firelight, bellies finally full, eyes soft for the first time in weeks. For a fleeting moment, you almost believe the nightmare might be ending, that maybe, somehow, you've turned a corner. The cold doesn't seem quite as cruel. The hunger doesn't gnaw quite as loud. But when the hunter passes you a small strip of dried meat for the journey back, you hesitate. It's dark, dense, familiar in a way you can't name. You force a smile, pocket it, and tell yourself not to ask. Later, back aboard the ship, you chew it anyway. You tell yourself it's seal. You tell yourself that until you fall asleep. And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll believe it. Here's where history argues. How often did pirates actually interact with indigenous Arctic and northern peoples? Some scholars believe encounters like this were rare but real, driven by desperation and the sheer necessity of survival. Others doubt pirates ever reached those latitudes, suggesting stories like these are half legend, half myth, built from sailors' tales and scattered truths. But for those who did meet them, one thing is certain. Without that shared meal, that brief trade of kindness in the cold, they wouldn't have lived to tell anyone anything. You close your eyes, listening to the sea lap gently against the hull. It almost sounds forgiving. Almost. You'd think a man would remember a feast, but memory works funny after hunger. What you recall most isn't the taste of whale skin or the flicker of the Inuit fire. It's the moment you realised you were full, and how alien that felt. For hours afterward, your stomach kept expecting the usual ache, that hollow drumbeat that never stopped, and when it didn't come, you almost missed it. Almost. Now, back aboard the ship with new supplies and a faint sense of warmth, the crew moves differently. They talk again. They laugh in short bursts. You hear humming at night, but underneath all that dim noise is a tension too soft to name. It starts the next evening when someone mentions a banquet. You nearly drop your bowl. The captain, apparently feeling generous or guilty, has decided morale needs a boost. He orders the cook to prepare a proper pirate feast, something worth remembering, before winter's last stretch. You can't decide whether to laugh or cry. A feast on this floating graveyard sounds like madness. But when you see the barrels lined up on deck, fish, beans, blubber, dried roots, you realise he's serious. The preparations begin at sunset. The cook's fire is roaring again, fuelled by wood traded from the villagers. A few men slice smoked fish while others crack open casks of dried fruit. Someone found an onion, an actual onion, and it's treated like a holy relic. The smell of it cooking hits the deck like a prayer. You catch yourself smiling for the first time in days. Dinner is chaos. The table, or rather 2 planks nailed across barrels, is loaded with bowls of stew, roasted blubber chunks glazed in syrupy molasses, biscuits softened in whale oil, and beans that actually taste of something other than salt. There's even a jug of watered wine, and someone's carved a candle stub into the shape of a crown and stuck it on top of a loaf of bread. For the King of Winter, Barlow declares, holding his cup high. The crew cheers weakly, but there's life in it. You sit beside the boy who lost his onion garden. He's grinning, cheeks full, soup dribbling down his chin. The cook, sweat shining on his forehead, looks almost proud. For a few moments it's easy to forget where you are. The ship creaks gently. The wind has softened. Everyone's talking about home, the taverns, the girls, the food they'll eat if they ever make port again. Roasted lamb, fried eels, bread pudding. The fantasy builds like a fire, warm and dangerous. Then someone, maybe it's Bastian, half drunk on fortified wine, starts singing. It's an old sailor's tune, but slower, softer. You join in, even the captain hums. The rhythm feels right, the words like something ancient that belonged to all of you before the sea took everything else. For a brief flickering hour you feel human again, and that's when it hits you. This isn't a feast, it's theatre. A fragile illusion to keep everyone from cracking completely. The captain knows it. The cook knows it. Even the boy with the soup-stained chin probably knows it. The ship's pantry is half empty again, the weather's turning and spring is still weeks away. But tonight, pretending feels easier than truth. So you keep singing. The historians will argue about pirate feasts forever. Some claim they were common, raucous displays of equality where the captain and crew shared food and drink alike, living by their own rules. Others call them myths, the kind of tales pirates told themselves to feel noble. Maybe both are true. Maybe a feast wasn't about abundance at all, but about defiance, sitting together on a freezing ship and declaring, "We're still here." You eat until your belly aches. You drink until your fingers stop trembling. You laugh when Barlow drops his biscuit into the fire and calls it extra crisped. When the cook brings out the last dish, some bizarre dessert of dried apple boiled in rum and rolled in sugar, you nearly cry. It's the best thing you've ever tasted. When the meal's done, you lean back against the rail, warm for the first time in months, the sea glittering like glass under a full moon. The captain makes a toast to the crew that refused to die. Everyone cheers, the sound rough but real. For once, no one's thinking about hunger or death or the cold, just this moment. Later, when the fire dies down and the stars grow thin, you stay awake a while longer. You think about what the feast really means, how every bite was a tiny rebellion against the sea, the storm and the emptiness that almost swallowed you. You wonder if this night will be remembered, or if it'll vanish like smoke. You hope someone will tell the story right, not as glory but as survival, not as a pirate banquet, but as proof that even starving men can choose to live beautifully for one night. The next morning the deck smells of spilled rum and burnt blubber. The barrels are lighter, the sky darker, and the hunger already creeping back, but for now, you carry the warmth of that feast in your bones. You're not sure what wakes you, maybe the sudden warmth or the soft murmur of voices just below deck, but when your eyes open the light is different. It's yellow, flickering, firelight, not the usual icy glow of dawn or the sickly grey of cloud-choked skies. It's real fire, controlled, contained, and when you sit up in your hammock, rubbing frost from your eyelashes, you hear something even stranger, laughter, real laughter. Not the dry, sarcastic kind that's more cough than chuckle, but honest, belly-deep amusement. You climb down from your hammock and follow the sound like a hound chasing smoke. It leads you to the galley. You freeze in the doorway, eyes adjusting. The cook's there, sleeves rolled, face flushed. A wooden spoon in his hand and a proud grin plastered across his soot-smudged face. Around him are a handful of crewmates, sitting cross-legged, spoons clutched, eyes wide. The scent hits you next, rich, buttery, with a hint of onion and something sweet. You blink. On the table is a pot. Not just a pot. A masterpiece. It's bubbling with something thick and golden, steam curling up in fragrant ribbons. And beside it, stacked like treasure, are slices of what looks suspiciously like bread. Actual bread. Tumisi. Not hardtack, not a biscuit, not leather. You step forward slowly, afraid it's an illusion. "Morning meal," the cook says, barely able to hide the smugness. Tavern style. You sit, a bowl is handed to you. It's warm. Not just the contents, the bowl itself is warm, heated by the fire. Already you know this is the fanciest thing you've held in your hands in months. Inside, the stew is thick with potatoes, chopped onion, a little dried Gruyere, and something that tastes like butter. You take a bite. It slides down your throat like comfort itself. You almost weep. Then comes the real miracle. Bread. Still warm. Still soft. Tearing it open releases a puff of steam, and for one moment you forget where you are. "How?" you ask. The cook leans back proudly. "Fermented the flour we took from the merchant ship. Let it sit in a sealed jar by the brazier for 4 days. Got lucky. Found yeast." He winks. "Or mould. Either way it worked." You chew into Oyance, the bread is dense, a little sour, and still better than anything you ever stole, begged, or brought back home. The stew has just enough spice to make your lips tingle. Someone passes a cup of thin ale, warm and flat but drinkable. Someone else strums a few notes on a broken lute missing 2 strings. The sound is rough, but the rhythm feels right. And just like that, you're in a tavern. Not a real one, of course. There are no wenches or roaring fireplaces or mugs sloshing over with froth. But if you squint, if you lean into the fantasy, you can feel it. The fire, the warmth of people nearby, the sound of stories being told between bites of food, the flickering illusion of comfort. This is how pirates celebrated winter on land, when they made port and the sea stopped trying to kill them for 5 minutes. You remember stories of those nights, taverns packed with sailors, tables buckling under salted meat, roasted goose, warm cider, the walls humming with music and shouts. And now, here you are, halfway recreating it in the hull of a ship battered by frost and fear. Turns out pirates weren't always the screaming, sword-swinging lunatics history makes them out to be. Sometimes they were just cold men with aching teeth and empty bellies who wanted to feel normal for a few hours. And this right here, is as close as it gets. Your bowl's half empty when the cook pulls out a pouch. Cloth, oil-stained. He opens it and reveals a handful of crumbled herbs. Thyme, from the last trade, he says, tossing a pinch into the pot, and dried citrus peel. Citrus. You stare. That's medicine. That's luxury. That's something people kill for out here. You remember the man who lost his teeth, the others who faded into coughs and fever. You saved this? Someone whispers. The cook nods. Only for the right meal. This might be the smartest man aboard. He pours another round of stew. You eat again. The citrus cuts the fishiness, brightens the flavour. The thyme lingers on your tongue like something holy. There's music now, soft and meandering. Barlow's tapping a rhythm on an upturned barrel. Someone hums along. This isn't survival anymore. It's something better, something human. And here's today's curious historical aside. Many pirate ships had rules for shore leave that required a stop at a tavern or public house. Not just for celebration, but to resupply on things like vinegar, beer, citrus, onions, and fresh bread. They knew what hunger did to a man, what scurvy did. So those brief nights in port, those weren't just parties, they were strategies. Some even say that pirates drank lemon wine specifically to keep illness away, though historians still debate whether that was medical insight or sheer luck. What's not debated is that tavern nights, real or recreated, were lifelines. Rituals that reminded the crew who they were besides sailors and thieves. You look around at your own makeshift tavern. 10 men, 3 candles, a half-rotted lute, and a pot of fish and potato stew that tastes like heaven. If this is survival, you'll take it. You go for seconds. Later, as the fire dims and the crew drifts off to sleep, someone leans in and whispers, "If we die tomorrow, I want to die remembering this meal," so you nod. Because same, it starts with a whisper again, always does. This time it comes from the bosun, a man who doesn't normally speak unless someone's fallen overboard or stolen his pipe. You overhear him while patching a torn sail near the captain's quarters. His voice is low, but the words still make your skin go tight. "He's got stores," he says. "I seen it. Under the bunk. Not scraps, real stuff. Cheese, dried beef, maybe even nuts. Nuts. You haven't even thought about nuts in weeks. The idea hits your stomach like a stone in a still pond. One word, and now your brain is flooded with the memory of roasted almonds, walnuts slick with honey. The snap of pistachios under your thumb. You shake it off, but it doesn't go away. By that evening, the whisper has become a mutter, passed from man to man with increasing heat. The captain, it seems, has a private stock. Not for the crew, not for emergencies, for himself. No one wants to believe it at first. The captain's not loved, but he's respected, feared in the useful way. He keeps order, he doesn't flinch during storms, and most importantly, he eats what the rest of you eat, or seems to. But doubt is contagious, especially when you're hungry. So you start to watch, everyone does. The captain's movements, his meals, the way his coat sits a little looser now, how he disappears into his quarters for longer than necessary, always alone. And then there's the smell. The moment you notice it, you can't unsmell it. Something rich, oily, faintly sweet, like roasted meat or melted cheese barely covered by incense or pipe smoke. It leaks out from under the door during quiet hours, and suddenly everything changes. A small group of crewmen gather in hushed corners. They are planning something, not mutiny, not yet. Just an investigation. A casual look into the captain's personal quarters. Nothing hostile, just curiosity. Hunger in disguise. You're not invited, not officially, but you end up part of it anyway when the night turns stormy and the captain steps out to inspect the rigging, giving the group their chance. You hold the lantern. The lock on the captain's quarters isn't locked. That's the first surprise. It swings open with an easy creak, revealing a space warmer and more inviting than anything else on the ship. The floor is dry. The blankets on his bunk are thick, layered in wool and lined with fur. A carved wooden box sits beneath it, and a faint scent of clove hangs in the air. The bosun kneels and opens the box. Inside, a trove, not gold, food, real food. Wheels of hard cheese wrapped in wax, small sacks of almonds, dried cherries, figs, jerky sealed in cloth, a jar of something dark, maybe honey, another filled with oil-preserved garlic cloves. You all just stare for a moment, like it's treasure pulled from the ocean floor. No one speaks, then someone reaches. One fig, one almond, one slice of cheese. It starts slowly, but the hands multiply. You take a piece of dried meat, thin, cured, and impossibly fragrant. You chew it slowly. Every nerve in your mouth lights up. You haven't tasted fat like this in weeks. Salt and smoke and something almost festive. It tastes like memory. And just like that, the box is half empty. The bosun closes it, straightens the blankets, wipes the latch clean. No one says a word. You all leave before the captain returns, moving quietly, like ghosts. No one asks what just happened. No one calls it theft. And when the captain comes back later, soaking wet from the rain and barking orders about the mainsail, he doesn't mention a thing. He knows, of course he does, but he doesn't confront anyone. Maybe he thinks it was a warning. Maybe it was. Later in the quiet after shift, you sit with Barlow near the stern. He's chewing an almond like it's the finest thing he's ever tasted. Didn't think I'd ever eat one again, he says. You nod. He spits the shell into the sea. He should have shared, he says flatly. You nod again, because that's the heart of it. Not the hoarding, not even the secrecy. Is the fact that you all starved while he sat on a bounty. And no matter how good the man is with a sword or how sharp his compass, that's a break you can't mend. And here's your historical wrinkle for the night. Some pirate codes, yes, real ones, had strict rules about food distribution, articles of agreement that declared rations were to be shared equally, even among officers. Some captains obeyed. Others, well, there's a reason so many ended up overboard in the dark. Scholars still argue whether private stores like the captain's were rare or common. Some say captains had to keep something aside for emergencies or as leverage. Others argue it was just greed, plain and simple. But the record is clear. When trust broke over food, things fell apart fast. Back in your hammock, belly slightly less empty than the night before, you wonder what the next day will bring. You're not proud of what you took, but you're not sorry either. You close your eyes and let the taste linger on your tongue. The salt, the fat, the faint sweetness. Not luxury, just fairness. You wake to shouting, not panic, not violence. Just the sharp bark of decisions being made. Orders flying, footsteps thudding above. You blink into the early light slicing through the slats overhead. Your body aching from sleep that was more like a shutdown than rest. Voices call for sails, rigging, speed. Then someone yells the word you haven't heard in what feels like centuries. Port! You swing your legs out of the hammock so fast your joints protest, but you don't care. You scramble to the deck, boots slipping, heart thudding, and there it is, low on the horizon, nearly hidden by mist and rising sun, a smudge of rooftops and docks, a real port, smoke from chimneys, seagulls circling, the faint echo of hammers and carts, civilization. It doesn't feel real. The captain stands near the helm, calm, coat billowing, like he planned this all along. Maybe he did. Maybe he's been holding course through storm and hunger with nothing but this in his mind. Or maybe he got lucky. Either way, no one thanks him. No one says anything at all. Everyone's too busy staring at the promise of solid ground and full bellies. By the time you dock, your legs feel wrong, like they forgot what stillness is. The ship creaks against the pier as the gangplank drops. The smell hits you first. Fish, coal smoke, animal dung, but also bread. And cider. Roasting meat. You actually close your eyes and just breathe it in, hands trembling. Then the quartermaster announces shore leave in groups, rotating watches to guard the ship while the rest go find food, drink, and if they're lucky, a bed that doesn't sway. You get assigned to the second group, which means you have a few hours to kill before you can step onto the dock. You chew a piece of old biscuit you saved from breakfast, tastes like sawdust, and stare longingly at the taverns beyond. But what waits ashore is more complicated than just warm stew and clean sheets. Because when your group's turn finally comes and your boots hit solid wood, it's not like you'd imagined. The joy is there, yes, the awe, but so is the sheer noise. After months of groaning timbers and coughing men, the market feels like a thunderstorm, loud, chaotic, full of people who don't look like they've missed a meal in their lives. Children run through puddles, dogs bark, merchants shout prices, and you just stand there trying not to fall apart. You make your way to the tavern first. It's not the best one. Too close to the docks, too many pirates already slouched over mugs, but you don't care. You grab a table, you order whatever's hot. The barmaid brings a bowl of barley stew so full of carrots and lamb that you nearly cry. Then comes a heel of bread with crust so crisp it cracks like a fire. You dip it into the broth and it soaks up flavour like a sponge designed by angels. You eat slowly at first, then faster, shoveling it in until the bowl is clean and your stomach is full and not in pain. That's new. You sit back, stunned by the feeling. Not just satisfied, comfortable. You don't realise how long you've been chewing with your eyes closed until someone nudges your shoulder. It's the boy, the one who tried to grow onions. He's holding a warm hand pie, grinning. "I got 2, he says, traded a copper button. You split it with him. Apples inside, sweet, warm, spiced. Real food. You chew slower this time, letting the sugar coat your tongue. The last time you tasted apple was, you don't even know. For the voyage, for the cold, you make your way through the port after that in a daze. Not drunk, just overwhelmed. You pass carts of fruit, baskets of eggs, ropes of sausage. One stall has soft cheeses wrapped in cloth oozing gently in the sun. Another sells boiled sweets in little wax papers. You don't have much coin, but you trade what you can, buttons, a belt buckle, a ring from a dead man's finger. It's enough. You return to the ship with a cloth pouch full of supplies. 3 eggs, a heel of cheese, 2 small oranges, and a dried sausage wrapped in brown paper. It's not a feast, but it's yours. Below deck, others do the same. Little treasures tucked into packs. One man bought spices, another found candied ginger. Someone else brought wine, not rum wine. Red and deep and thick enough to feel like velvet in the mouth. And you know, deep in your bones, that you'll need this, because winter's not done, the sea will still be waiting. But now you're stocked, ready, and just a little bit stronger, and maybe, just maybe, a little wiser. Because now you know what hunger can do, what cold can turn men into, how desperation can erode honour, and how sharing stew in the dark can save more than just your life. It can save your soul. That night, before the ship casts off again, the crew eats together one last time ashore. No captain, no ranks, just bowls and spoons and laughter and stories. Barlow tells the one about the rat stew that might have been a cat. The cook rolls his eyes and pretends not to smile. You sit beside the boy again. He's got an orange in one hand and a pocket full of dirt. "What's that for?" you ask. He shrugs. "Gonna try the onions again?" You nod. "Good luck," he grins. "Luck's better with soil." And maybe that's true. Maybe this time something will grow.